Thank you. I would like to first acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded, never surrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Gentlemen. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. May I ask for a roll call, please?
Councillor Brockington,
Here.
Councillor Curry. Here. Councillor Dudas. I'm present. Councillor Johnson. Here. Councillor Kavanaugh. Present. Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Kitts. Here. Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Truster. Here. Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 6.1, 6.3, and 6.4 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those specifically identified in the Planning Act who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of an application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on October the 30th, 2024, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. No declarations of interest were filed. Are there any? Are the minutes of our meeting 35, October 9th, 2024 confirmed? Thank you. There is a response to inquiry on the agenda with respect to green procurement. The first item on the agenda is the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition on their Indigenous Housing and Homelessness Plan. We do have a presentation that I'm looking forward to that. That is nominally my councillor's report, so I'll ask Vice Chair Gower to take over the chair while that's done, although I'm sure no one is expecting any procedural shenanigans. There is the zoning bylaw amendment for part of 3636 Innes Road. We don't have any presentation, no delegations, no correspondence. Did members want to hold that for a presentation or discussion? To Brian and Melissa, if the committee is prepared to carry this, do you still wish to speak? Thank you very much. Is that item carried? Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy, for your work on that one. There's a zoning bylaw amendment for 1280 Trim Road that was listed in the agenda, was withdrawn prior to this meeting. There is the minor zoning bylaw amendment for 2128 Trim Road. Again, no presentation, no delegations, and no correspondence. Did members want to hold this for a presentation or discussion? Evan Garfinkel with the Regional Group, if the committee is prepared to carry this, do you still wish to speak? Thank you. Members of the committee, is that item carried? Thank you, and thank you to Kelly Livingston for her work on that. There is the item for 1495 Heron Road. We'll have a presentation for that, and we do have delegation from the Guildwood Residents Alliance. So we'll hold that for discussion, and the 2024 DC Background Study Amendment Report and bylaws. There's a number of motions. There'll be a presentation, and I'm sure lots of discussion. Anything else? Nope. So we'll go back to the start of the substantive agenda, which is 5.1, the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition on their Indigenous Housing and Homelessness Plan. I'll give those who want to make a presentation a chance to come on up. And in the meantime, I'll yield the chair to Vice Chair Gower.
Good morning and welcome to the committee today. We're looking forward to your presentation, and I'll let you introduce yourselves, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So thank you, Chair and Vice Chair and councillors. do we have control over this or? Next slide.
We can help with the slides here. If you could just move a little closer to the microphone or move the microphone closer
Okay,
to you. Thank
there
you.
we go. So maybe, yeah, and we just want to acknowledge the land acknowledgement. And then next slide. So my name is Joan Riggs. So I'm the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition Facilitator. I'm just going to turn over to the two co-chairs.
It is an honor to be here. I am Mary Doust. I'm the Executive Director for Minwashin Lodge Indigenous Women's Support Center, and I'm also the co-chair for the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition.
Ulakut. Stephanie McKay Adams. I am the Executive Director with Inukatigi Center for Inuit Children, Youth and Families, as well as the co-chair of the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition.
Good morning. My name is Mark Miracle. I'm the Executive Director with Gignal Housing and also the co-chair with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition's Housing and Homeless Committee and Strategy. And I'd just like to extend my greetings from my co-chair, Karen Green, who is unable to join us this morning. But there's more to me than just me.
Perfect. So the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition is made up of 10 Indigenous service organizations that serves roughly 22,000 Indigenous community members out of the 45,000 Indigenous community members in Ottawa. Between our 10 Indigenous organizations, we have just over 550 staff. The property assets between the 10 Indigenous organizations are estimated to be around roughly $200 million. The OAC acts on the collective issues and concerns, which is raised by the 10 Indigenous service organizations, with the goal of advocating for systemic change and for ensuring that the gaps that our Indigenous people see are addressed to better meet the needs of our community. Ottawa has the largest Inuit community south of Inuit Nunangat and also has the largest Cree community outside of any home Cree community. The Ottawa Indigenous community is growing at a tremendous rate. It is estimated that the community will grow up to 50,000 individuals in the next few years. It is also a very young population, with 25% of our community under 30 years old. The Inuit population is one of the fastest growing populations in the world. Next slide. So Ottawa is a place of belonging for Indigenous people. The OAC vision is a place of belonging for our Indigenous people here in Ottawa. We are a community within a community.
The OAC has a number of priorities, many that came out of COVID, and we are here today to talk about one of those priorities, which is the Ottawa Indigenous Housing and Homelessness Strategy. Mark?
So our vision in terms of the strategy is the creation of 1,000 new homes here in the city of Ottawa for Indigenous people by 2034. Really, we've been on a 20-year journey. Since 2001, the coalition was established to respond to the crisis of homelessness. What's ironic is that the challenge of homelessness has only increased since we come together as a coalition. In 2004, the Wabano Center for Aboriginal Health made a presentation to one of the city committees called The Silent Crisis that showed the level of crisis and intersection between homelessness and mental health. And it also reinforced the intersection of poverty and children.
Next, so when COVID hit in 2020, a couple of things happened. One was that these these executive directors they run service organizations. So right away, they had to respond to the needs of the 22,000 people they were serving. We also had a lot of increase of people who needed food security. We had a lot of elders that needed to respond. We had to advocate for needs. So we've had a long-standing relationship with the city. And so we were on your Human Needs Task Force. And the other thing we had to do is we had to tell our story, because people are always eager to tell the story of Indigenous community members, but it's not necessarily the story that we want to tell. So we did our own research. And out of our research, we ended up having some very interesting results. So about 1,700 community members filled out 69 questions. So we had 340 pages of just qualitative data. But the housing story around COVID was really significant, because what it told us is the intersection, just like in the silence crisis in 2004, the intersection between mental health, addictions, and housing was so interlinked. And what we saw was that 2/3 of the people that ended up being homeless during COVID had also lost somebody to suicide or to COVID. And so when Mickey and I were at a meeting, one of the community members said, "We are born grieving." And one of the things we really realized is that it doesn't really matter what kind of housing you have. If you're dealing with intergenerational trauma and the consequences of intergenerational trauma, then you're actually dealing with a very complex situation. Next slide.
In 2021, the city provided the OAC with point-in-time Indigenous data to analyze. And the date confirmed what we were seeing in our organizations and on the street. The situation was getting worse for Indigenous people in Ottawa. Despite all of the hard work being done by the city, despite the millions, likely billions of dollars being spent on responding to homelessness, Indigenous community members were more vulnerable than everyone in Ottawa. And it was our children that were the most vulnerable. 14% of the survey group became homeless after leaving foster care or group home care after 1 day. After 10 days, 21% or 1/5 of the youth leaving child welfare were on the street, homeless and vulnerable to human and sex trafficking. And this is not how we love our children. Next slide.
In 2023, our ACAB survey with homeless community members found that nearly 70% of Indigenous participants experiencing homelessness in Ottawa identified as Inuit. 70%. We have had to have a different response than police, shelters, and the lack of fundamental addictions and mental health services for our Inuit community members here in Ottawa. And in our research with the Alliance to End Homelessness in 2023, we saw again the interconnection between the restoration of culture, mental health, and housing. Yep. So 2 weeks ago, the Ottawa Inuit Synergy Table met, which is comprised of the Ottawa Public Health, led by Vera Etches and her team. They presented heartbreaking numbers in the amount of Inuit deaths here in Ottawa yearly since 2023. The amount of deaths that were presented were staggering and very heartbreaking. Again, Ottawa is the largest community for Inuit members outside of our home community of Inuit Nunangat. We must ensure that we provide a safe space for our Inuit community here in Ottawa, which includes housing, mental health, and access to programs and services.
So this is where we started our work around our Housing and Homeless Committee. We were working with CMHC's continuum that was expressed in a linear fashion, and you can see in upcoming slides, we've basically formulated that continuum in a circle because choice about housing needs and priorities change and they evolve. And we see it more as a circular relationship, which is consistent with Indigenous values. And as you can see, the recurring themes over the 20 years and the recognition that things are not getting better led the coalition to recognize we need to think about these things differently. So what can we do? The notion is to move upstream, to look at recurring patterns and relationships that homelessness has to be specific systems like child welfare and institutional discrimination, and to continue to build a circle of care that supports for people regardless of where they live, to address the mental health and other supports that are needed and move away from simply warehousing people into shelters. And we continually ask ourselves, what can we do differently? So we start with our foundation, and it's not just about housing first, it's about people first. And I will say one thing in terms of how we look at it as Gignal housing here in the city, it's not just as a landlord. It very much is about a relationship with our tenants, with our families, and with our community. People have needs that extend into their home, such as food security, mental health, community and connection. Mental health and housing intersect. Mental health disrupts the ability to get and to maintain a home. So we went upstream and we built a foundation for our new strategy. Housing and homeless priorities. We're working with many partners right now and opportunities about expanding choice in the community. We've had significant discussions with the Sandy Hill Cooperative Housing, with Ottawa Community Housing, with the Parkdale United Church. We're working specifically on a supportive housing model with a number of partners, including Solace, Options by Town, and the John Howard Society and Gignal, as well as talking to the federal government on a variety of surplus lands that they have identified and that we've expressed an interest in further examination about establishing housing, services, and actually a more detailed Indigenous hub. We're building assets around the base of Indigenous community here in Ottawa that includes Gignal and Inuit nonprofit housing on the housing side, independent living, but also extends to other members of the coalition that are involved in some form of housing or homelessness and shelters. So that includes Minwashin, Wabano, Odawa, Tungasuviat Inuit, that are all extending services to this critical part of our community. So I think that's Nikki.
The first initiative that the OAC has will bring $45 million into the city and is creating something that is critically needed for our Inuit community here in Ottawa. It will also be the very first Inuit-specific violence against women shelter outside of Inuit Dunangat. So CMHC approved $6.4 million for the build. The City of Ottawa has approved land on Forest Glade. Indigenous Service Canada has approved $1.8 million of operating costs for 20 years. We have hired Fortin as project managers. We have hired Architects Formline and LGA Architectural Partners. So far, we have held 2 workshops with the Inuit community, with Inuit women that have faced and has experienced fleeing violence. And we have had 1 community gathering with the neighborhood as well to ensure that their voice is heard and that they feel that the building belongs to them and is definitely Inuit specific, as well as in ensuring that our IQ principles and values are also brought into the project as well. The architects listened to our community and have designed a 2-story building that creates and reflects safety. And also, we had listened to what the neighborhood has to say. And as well, we have brought in their comments to ensure that they also have a belonging to the building and that they feel safe as well in their own neighborhood.
Next slide. Our second initiative is actually keeping tenants in their homes and avoiding homelessness. So both Gignil and Inuit nonprofit housing were identifying tenants that weren't good tenants. They were disruptive to other neighbors. They had a lot of needs. So we've created the Indigenous Wellbeing Workers. And again, the City of Ottawa has provided us through the Community Safety and Wellbeing funds this program, and we're super grateful because what it's allowed us to do is keep people, including families, away from being homeless. And it's also helped us really identify again that it starts with it's not housing first, it's people first. So even when you're housed, you still have trauma and they still have addictions. So this group is, in addition to doing wellness activities, is working one-on-one with individual tenants. Next slide.
Our third initiative, the Family Healing Lodge, which is led by Minwashan Lodge. This has been a vision of ours since 2008. We have been doing our best to proceed to find operating costs and capital costs to build the very first Indigenous Family Healing Lodge in the Ottawa region, where moms can work on their healing and their trauma and their addictions by bringing their children with them. Because many Indigenous women have to leave their home community. They have to go to different treatment centers all over Ontario and leave their child behind or children behind. And not many have those good, healthy supports where they can feel confident to work on their trauma and not worry about their child and their well-being. And I cannot say I know what that would feel like, because I can't imagine worrying about my child and having to focus on such heavy, complex issues that have been a part of the intergenerational traumas that were caused by the residential school, 60 Scoop, et cetera. And so by mom being able to bring her child, she can be in a good place and stay focused and stay grounded and do the work that she needs to do, knowing that her children are in a safe environment and knowing that they do not have to worry about them, because the child will be looked after by the aunties and the elders and the staff that would be caring for them while mom does the hard work. And so we have been working very, very hard since 2008 to make this become a reality. And it was the women's voices behind our closed doors that voiced this, not Minwashan. It was the women. And we heard them loud and clear. And it is so imperative for this to happen because we need it. It's not a want, it's a need. And it is critical because we are losing women and we're losing mothers to substance use, overdoses, you name it. And it's not because of their choice, it's because of how the system has set them up to fail. We want to be able to give them a service that is going to work for them and for their children. and it will heal the whole family, not just mom. This is about healing the family so that when mom goes back to community, it's the whole family that is healthy, not just one person of that environment. And that is what's going to be the, I think that is what is required in order for it to be a success long-term. And so we are looking forward to having this Family Healing Lodge become a vision, not more than a vision, but now becoming a reality, such as the Inuit VAW shelter. We desperately needed that as well. And so the city has played a huge part in being an ally on this, and very, very grateful for the city's support. They've been phenomenal. And so the Family Healing Lodge will provide Indigenous women with the opportunity to be in a safe place for up to 6 months, no 28 days. That doesn't work. Even 3 months, maybe that doesn't work, but 6 months, that gives them a good foundation of time and healing, and not feeling pressured to go through a cycle of programming that is not going to stay with them long-term. And so without fear of losing their children to child welfare, and to be in a culturally based, trauma-informed place to do their recovery work. The children will also have the opportunity to be counseled, loved, and supported as their mothers restore their health. Working with the city around land for the Family Healing Lodge, we applied for 10 million to Nietzsche for capital costs in the first round of funding for Indigenous housing. We made it through to the last round, and we are going to apply again in the fall. Where we fell short, we did have a meeting with Nietzsche and found out that right now the focus is affordable housing, long-term sustainable affordable housing. So with the Family Healing Lodge, yes, we provide transitional support for women up to 6 months. But by attaching this piece of property that the city is offering, it's going to allow long-term affordable housing on that same acreage as the Family Healing Lodge. And that is a win-win, because the housing is being addressed, the healing is being addressed, and it's being addressed on one parcel of land. So to me, it's a win-win for everybody. And so the business plan and the feasibility study, we continually keep that updated, just because as time lapses, there's changes that happen. So we continually update our business plan and our feasibility studies. And we're working with the Ontario government to support our operating costs. So that's where it's at the moment. But again, it is critical that we see this come to life in order to save our moms and our babies. So,
So one of the things in our priorities and in our approach is the ability to dream big. And we are currently in discussions with the federal government on some of their surplus lands. And one of site in particular is the Charles Tupper site at the southwest corner of Riverside and Heron Road. And we have a vision that includes the creation of an urban Indigenous hub that includes housing, a range of services, and I would say commercial opportunities, and lots of trees. It's adjacent to the park, it's close to the river. It would address a lot of the cultural connections that all of our organizations and our communities seek. And we are actually going to be able to workshop some of the vision that goes in this, and including community members to express what they would like to see in an Indigenous hub. So that's an opportunity to connect. I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that, and Mary's alluded to this in terms of the vulnerability of women in our community. Gignal housing is one of more than 100 typical urban-based housing providers across this country. And Gignol's 60% of our tenant base are single mothers. So there is a level of vulnerability that we're serving. And we want to see that reinforced and supported so that they can thrive and they can feel whole in this city and be contributing productive citizens and able to enjoy what this city offers, and also to share the gifts that they bring as well. So, thank you.
Wouldn't it be amazing if instead of seeing the Inuit homeless group on the corner of Rideau and what's that street? Sussex? Wouldn't it be amazing to see Indigenous people smiling, being happy, living a normal life as they should? The OAC is going back to our vision. And that is, we are committed to serving the needs of the Indigenous population here in Canada, here in Ottawa. As I mentioned, we have a community of 22,000 Indigenous people here in Ottawa. This is a place of belonging. This is their home as well. Again, I must go back to the data and statistics that the coroner presented to the Inuit Synergy Group. I'm not too sure if you have been privy to that information yet, but once you see it, it's going to be staggering. You're going to be surprised as the amount of how many Inuit women and their children and their families has died here in Ottawa. That's essentially entire families going missing. We cannot stress anymore the importance of safe Indigenous community housing with proper supports and services in order for us to realize our vision of happy, smiling Indigenous people with the belonging here in Ottawa. That is what we strive to commit to. We cannot continue to fail our Indigenous women and children any longer. We must be able to show them love, compassion, and empathy, and be able to provide them with the supports and services so that they do feel like they belong here in Ottawa, as you do, as we do. It's our right to belong. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that the conclusion of the presentation? Can you turn on your mic?
Oh,
Thank
our
you.
final comment is just that we want to acknowledge the city as a really good partner. Like, I think that's one of the things that, you know, people are saying like, why are you doing this presentation? What do you want? And we don't really want anything except for you to continue to be a good partner. And for us, what that means in part is the systems that you're working within and that you have to work within, they don't work for us. And partly what happened when COVID happened is we just realized that you may have EDI frameworks and they're really good, but we work from a social justice framework. Every system we exist in was designed to eliminate Indigenous people in this country. And so we have to start from our own context, our own worldview, and our own values. And we look for partners like yourselves that will really work with us in a meaningful way. And so thank you for that. Thank you for coming and being that kind of partner. And we're very grateful to the staff that we've had the privilege of working with in the city for a long time. Some of us are old, not these two, but us. So that's it. And we have a beautiful video. So at some time, please look at it. It's 5 minutes and it's really good. It's beautiful.
Thank you. There may be some questions from committee members. I see Ariel Crosser. Go ahead, Ariel.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank you so much for being here. As the councillor that represents one of the wards with the highest rates of homelessness, I don't think people appreciate the degree to which trauma intersects with addiction and with homelessness, particularly among the far too high representation of Indigenous folks on our street. And so, and I know, and I just want to let you know the city is with you, because I know that the transfer of the land for the Inuit Women's Shelter brought out some ugliness from the community and frankly, a racist, unacceptable backlash. but it passed without controversy here at the city. We are with you. My question to you is, as you can imagine, there's a lot of compassion fatigue happening in the community. And I have to say, I'm receiving emails that are more and more dehumanizing of folks who are struggling. I know that you work with this population, that there's a high number of Indigenous folks. Do you have any advice for counselors on how we might communicate to folks the connection between trauma and some of what we're seeing on the street, which can lead to social disorder? Just any of your perspective on how we might combat that compassion fatigue, because I have to say that is my biggest struggle. I see a side of humanity in my inbox that I would prefer not to sometimes, and I'm sure you do too. And if we're going to be in this together, I think we need to think about that, about how we really help our residents understand how important this work is and how beneficial this kind of housing is to the whole community, not just to Indigenous folks.
Well, I can just say from Minwashan's perspective, this is our day-to-day reality. And many days go by that, you know, we carry heavy hearts, not going to lie. However, you know, there are successes too that happen out there. And maybe I can just suggest that one of the messages is just to say that you're being heard. We hear what you're saying. We hear your story, and we are here to support any way that we can. And it's just about them knowing that it's not falling on deaf ears, and that you are paying attention, and that you are reading those disheartening emails. But that's the balance, you know, is that's the truth too, you know, and we do have to look at that. We do have to look at that, but it's just acknowledging that we hear you, we see you, and we're working on a solution, and we're working on a solution together with the Indigenous, you know, community, and that we will, you know, move forward in a good way, but doing it all together, because we can't stand alone. We can't stay in silos any longer. It doesn't work. It just disrupts all the goodness that each of us carry. And we need to be able to work together in order to find the solutions together. And if you're getting these emails, how many are we getting, right? And so if we come together and work on this and just reassure them, we hear you, we see you, we feel, you know, that in itself can be helpful.
Yeah, I try to redirect people's anger to the systems that have failed people,
Yeah.
instead of to the people who are actually struggling on our streets. So I just want to thank you. This
Yeah.
work is groundbreaking, and I think we have so much to learn as a city from the example that you're setting as an Indigenous housing provider in how we can do supportive housing better, because it really is the solution to homelessness. So thank you
Yeah.
for being
You're
here.
welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate the work that you're doing in terms of coming up with solutions for the long term. One of the questions I have is particular to the Inuit community. I have Largabaffin in my ward, and it's a place where many Inuit first arrived to Ottawa for medical treatment. And I can't help but wonder, many probably transitioned to become residents, but I'm not sure how successful the transition is. And I don't know if you have any comments about that, but I remain concerned that we're, you know, that there's perhaps some assistance that's needed. And we do have a Inuit Center as well, the TI as we call it. But I just wanted your comments on how we can do better on that, on welcoming Inuit.
Thank you for your comment and your question. And that is how the Ottawa Inuit Synergy Group was established, was to address the needs of the Inuit community circle that have come down to medical services. One of the ways that we are tackling that is by increasing outreach within Inuktitut Center, within Tungasuvinga Inuit, through the support of the Ottawa Public Health and as well through support of CCSA. We are working on bridging those services, not only through Inukatigi Center, but also through the OAC to ensure that those individuals are either repatriated back home, ensuring that their safety is brought back to Nunavut, and or they are provided with transitional housing through one of our service providers. We do understand that the answer is not going to be, we're not going to have an answer, or we're not going to see homelessness cleared up in a short-term span. We understand that it's going to take long-term in order to provide these very important services to individuals. And we also understand that also keeping an understanding that some people do not want to be helped, that some people prefer to live on the street due to the fact that they do not trust local mainstream service providers due to the intergenerational trauma that have prevailed Indigenous people. Again, I would like to go back to my vision of wouldn't it be amazing to see happy, healthy Indigenous people as a norm here in Ottawa, not only in Ottawa, but as within Canada. I think one of the initiatives that we are working on, we're able to share to our counterparts in the East, North, West Coast to ensure that they are not reinventing the wheel themselves. So the OAC, the Ottawa Inuit Synergy Group are paving ground, and we are breaking ground, and we are assuring that our community members are being served and being taken care of and being loved. As a female Inuk myself in an urban setting, I do understand and recognize there are many challenges to ensure the needs and safety of our community members are met. But then again, I also see the immense growth for opportunities, education, and empowerment for our Inuit community here in Ottawa, where our experiences are valued and understood instead of shunned upon.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Other question I
Teresa,
have-
is it okay if I just,
Yeah, sure.
just, they're the nice ones, I'm the not nice one, so just in terms of when we go upstream, part of the systems that have to change, and Larga-Baffin is a good example, is we worked with Larga-Baffin to ask them to change their zero tolerance harm reduction, because that was partly why we were seeing people being removed from Larga-Baffin and ending up on the street. And we now have some funding that we've received from the federal government to work with the Nunavut government within Inuit Synergy to find solutions, because what we don't want the VAW Inuit shelter to be is a place where people are just moving into that shelter, because it is for violence against women. And we do hold the Nunavut government responsible for providing service funding for a service that needs to be inclusive and caring of people. And so Larga-Baffin is going to be expanded significantly, and we need to address this in the next 2 years. So we're really working very hard. We've also been contacted by the ombudsperson in Ontario, who is looking at doing a review of this in light of some of the information that came out of the coroner's reports.
Thank you, Joan. And currently, you're working with mainstream shelters and supportive housing. And I just want to know if you've is there been any success, like, for example, Cornerstone, in terms of partnership and others that are currently working with Aboriginal women, if there's not one specifically for them right now, and how that is going.
Minwashin has had an ongoing partnership with Cornerstone at the Princeton site for about, I'd say about 4 years now. So again, we follow the person. not the housing piece. So we were guaranteed, I believe it was at the time, five units out of the 42 or something like that. It turned out that because we gave full wraparound support to each woman that came into Princeton, that they could see the success of how that has improved the women's mental wellness, how it's improved them staying housed, how they're not being evicted, how they're not being put out on the streets. And it has been a huge success to the point now that we have got 2 more partnerships with Cornerstone on their new sites, one on, I believe it was Eccles and Booth. And so now, again, we have been granted a percentage of units in all 3 buildings because of the full wraparound services that Minwashin can offer with our housing first workers. And it works, like it truly works, and it makes a huge difference. And they are calling us and asking us, how do we work with this woman? How do we deal with this problem? Can you come and can you sit with them and can you explain that we need to follow the guidelines and explain to them on their terms so that they understand fully what is being required by them. And it does work. So we have a full partnership with Cornerstone, and we also broke the mold, and we have an Indigenous cultural support worker that goes into all these sites and brings culture to the table. And everyone is invited, not just the Indigenous women. All women in the buildings are invited, and they take part in cultural circles and craft circles and medicine walks and whatever. And that has made a huge impact because then it's giving the Indigenous women a starting point of being connected and a sense of belonging in a community, like within the Cornerstone community, and then as a larger community within the Ottawa, the city of Ottawa. So those 2 pieces, we broke the mold on both of them. That was a first, and it's worked, and now we are continuing. We've just recently signed an agreement just recently for the other 2 sites. And it's like I said, it's been very successful, very successful. So we will continue to do that because we know that it really does work for both of them, because it takes the pressure off the staff at Cornerstone as well.
Really appreciate hearing about this. That's great news. Do I have time for another question? Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask about the aging out component. I have been approached, not me personally, but OCH has, in regards to persons aging out of children's aid. And it strikes me as something that's very important because the issue is that they often end up in OCH, but not successfully. And anyway, I didn't think in terms of just Aboriginal, but it's just overall, but the special needs for, because of the dominance of if there's a lot of Aboriginal youth in there, but it strikes me they need supportive housing. And I can't speak for OCH directly, but as much as I want to right now, but I think it's something to look at because I see that. And like I said, they're in the units of OCH, but they don't have the skills and to live on their own since they have not had that opportunity to be in that environment.
So we actually have if we kept going on, our 5th initiative is the Aging Out Initiative. And so we're working with Ottawa, Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services. And so and Children's Aid. And when they come out at 18, what we're planning to do is it's kind of like the first floor, it's communal, but they have their own pod. So they have privacy for their bedrooms, but it's that opportunity to get a sense of identity as an Indigenous person, to be loved, to have elders around you, and to learn life skills. And then the second year, they go to the second floor, which is an independent apartment, but they still have access to everything. And it's really familial. And the third year is they go into, well, hopefully into housing in the community, and we follow them. So it's just that 18 to 21 transition, and and we already have an executive director circle where we sit with the children's aid all the time. And those numbers are increasing, and the pit count was so disturbing that, 1/5 of them were homeless within 10 days. So we want to catch them even at 16 to 18 when we're already working with them, and then move them into these spaces.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Hello? Hello. What button do I push?
Hello? Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you very much for being here, and it's really nice to see some of you again and to meet some of you for the first time. My name is Lane Johnson. I'm the city councillor for College Ward. So MP Vandenbelt is our common denominator, and I know we had the opportunity to connect about the Tupper space last year. So I'm glad to hear that it's still progressing on site. Just to share a story, because it's coming up for me as I'm hearing you speak. So I was at a family funeral last weekend and connecting with some old family, and I hope you'll hear this family story in a spirit of hope. It was close enough to Thanksgiving that, we were sort of sharing stories about what we were thankful for. And I have this, I think he's 7, very bright, sensitive young man in my family. And when he was asked what he was thankful for, he said he was thankful that he never had to go to residential schools. And for me, that was like a hugely profound moment, because when I was in school, I wasn't taught that way. And here we have a 7-year-old boy who, is processing that pain and that suffering of children. And so when you talk about coming into this with a spirit of empathy and a spirit of understanding, that story for me is quite hopeful, because it sounds to me like there is a generational change in how we understand what truth and reconciliation looks and feels like. So I just wanted to share that with you, because for me, that was a really profound story. So I just have a couple questions related to the planning. So again, I'd love for you to be able to expand on the progress that you've made with the workshops that you shared, Mark, briefly for the Tupper space. And perhaps you could sort of let us know what's coming up, but also let us know, what we need to do to advocate with our federal partners, because I do see a federal role in this, most certainly. And we want to be able to be, on the same page in terms of our messaging and our asks. So can you let us know sort of a bit more specifics about the workshops, and then what the messaging might be collectively?
Well, we'll definitely keep the city in the loop. I think, as people have already mentioned, the relationship that we have with the city that's really evolved over the last 25 years, about talking about service gaps and relationship building, has been significant. And I think the federal government needs to be always reminded that the relationship with constituents, with people and communities, starts at this level of government far more. It's far more important. And it's probably the least understood by everybody. So the notion that they're providing an opportunity for a community vision that the city sees very much eye to eye from our perspective. So staying connected, staying supportive is critical. The workshop that I mentioned, the first opportunity is going to be at our career fair at the end of this month, where we've got a significant number of community members coming together around opportunities with respect to employment and training and partners. And it will be an opportunity to workshop this proposed Indigenous hub and let community members express what they would like to see. What's their vision for housing, for services, for commercial development, being able to connect more directly with Mother Nature is important. And we'll absolutely make sure that the city is involved every step of the way. So thank you for your interest and your support.
Just one follow-up question. So similar but different. Joan, you had mentioned in your comments that the systems that we impose don't always work for Indigenous partners. And, you know, I sort of have some reflection to do when working with Indigenous partners in College Ward, because, you know, I want to ensure that I'm advocating for them for the things that they need, but you know, there's certain methods of communication maybe that are not the same, or you know, timelines are different, or whatever the case may be. And I was just wondering if you could give us a crash course, you know, quickly on some of that sort of cultural competency when trying to support Indigenous partners in our ward, because I want to get it right. And who better to ask than those who have been supporting the city to get it right for 25 years.
We worked with an elder we work with many elders. We have an elder circle, but Elder Jim Albert used to always say, particularly to Mark and I, maybe we needed the lesson most. He said, don't do engagement, do relationship. Like, you don't need to do an engagement with a community when you have relationships with them. Just go and ask your friends, like sit with them, be in relationship. And it's always stuck with us. And so even on the federal government stuff, they're interested in giving it to us partly because they're doing so much procurement. So we've really attached it to our employment hub stuff. But we bring the city with us to every meeting that we have with the federal government, just because you're part of our circle. You belong to us now, and we want to bring you into it, into all of the work. So that's the biggest advice. And the other is that come where we are, because I have the privilege of being in relationship to all these executive directors, and I'll never forget when COVID hit, because they were looking after organizations. We had no PPEs. We weren't on the list of priorities, yet she has a shelter 24/7. He still has maintenance in all of his units. And it was the city that we had to go to say, help us. And so your relationship is so critical to support us. And remember, they're also thought leaders. So they're always in this place of creating something new if we create the space for it. That's our opportunity. Is we already have people they are grounded in community, they're grounded in Indigenous knowledge and worldview, and they can offer that alternative. We just have to create the space, and it's not an engagement, because we love your staff, your city staff, but they don't have an Indigenous worldview. So they're going to put it through a lens and give it to you, but it won't be what we can say to you. So.
The other thing that I would say, and this just builds on the whole notion of relationship building and what Jim Albert expressed to us at the very beginning of the coalition's life. And in terms of relationship building, what is it? And it really is about awareness and education when two people or two parties sit down and get to know each other, know their challenges, and become more educated. But it's all premised on the integrity of the partnership or the relationship, the respect that people have a different perspective, a different worldview, and then building trust within that relationship. And as you build that, then you build the confidence to do things together. And I think that's where the magic always is you get to a point where you have confidence and trust in each other that you can then do shared risk. And the city has taken some very bold steps in working with the Indigenous community here over the last 20 years that is unique to the city of Ottawa than any other big city. And we're known for that across the country, within the federal government, within the provincial government, that the city of Ottawa has a different type of relationship with Indigenous people. And the payoff, it's very much like a mutual fund. It's not something we're going to see today or next summer. It might take 2 years, it might take 5 years, but that investment and that risk that we share is paying off, and it will pay off big, because the imagination, we've got an overwhelmingly young population. So that investment that we make in young people is gonna, the proof is will be in the pudding. And, you know, we're all part of that. We're not gonna change the world with one big thing. It's gonna be a million little things. And you're all part of those million little things.
Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for being here and for presenting to us, and to the chair who I understand invited you to do this presentation. It was excellent to hear from you. I understand your working relationship has been very good with city staff, and that you're supportive of the housing and homelessness Indigenous strategy. Can you just confirm how those discussions have been going, and your work with staff in that regard?
So through ACAB, some of our organizations work with the city through your formal City of Ottawa housing plan and strategy. And what we realized is that because we do everything so holistically, we needed all 10 of our organizations to be part of. And we also recognized there was too many limitations on how, like your continuum, like housing first as the framework really does limit how we approach and think about. So it's why we turned it into a circle and said, let's just create our own, and then we'll work with the city and complementing your strategy, but just using ours too. And, you know, we want to be super respectful, because even during COVID in the beginning, you gave us 26 requests as a city. Like, can you engage with us on your anti-racism strategy, on your sewage strategy? And we had to just say, no, we're not working on your 26 priorities. We're working on ours, and we're going to see if they mix together. And so our relationship with your staff is basically, how do we marry them together? But we're not trying to like meet yours, and we're not asking you to meet ours. We're just trying to do it together.
That's helpful. Thank you for that feedback. I was happy to see that there's big dreams about an Indigenous housing hub or village with housing services, trees, and a connection to the land. I'm wondering sort of what stage that might be in at this point, and are there locations where you know, you're being discussed that could be ideal? Is there more information you can give us on that big dream?
So the federal government's, they've shown us all 20, and we're working with Fortan to go through them. And they're big like there's big spaces, so we would be doing it with partners, but our passion is Charles Tupper. We want it. Like, and we're not shy. In fact, people are calling Mark saying, we understand you want Charles Tupper. So like, and you know, we're working with Yasser and the Jackson building. And, you know, he was like, take the whole building. And we're like, no, we want Charles Tupper. Because one of the things that in COVID research, which is we were surprised about, was the level of resiliency. People, when they stopped, you know, I think sometimes we forget that it's 45,000 Indigenous people. There's a lot of strong people. So they stopped, and they said what restored them was going back to culture and the land. Like, we have our own tools, mental health tools, to go back to restore ourselves and our communities and our families. And so we kind of need to have it. It's why we challenged the Ottawa hospital to not cut down 800 mature trees, like build it somewhere else. Like, we can't minimize what the damage to not just Mother Earth, but to spirit. If we're just, you can't replace a tree in 5 years.
Yeah, the loss of those trees was devastating in that area. I wanted to ask you just my last question around, you mentioned consultation that the city's been reaching out on different topics to get input and work together, which I think obviously is a good thing in collaborating, but you only have so much capacity and you have your own plans that you want to advance, which is understandable. How has consultation been going, I guess, with you? How does it relate to the AOO, who the city does a lot of discussions with, and your own kind of goals in that regard?
He's afraid I'm going to say something, so
I'll respond to the AAO question. I just firstly wanted to just let you know that the city has created or has co-created a housing and homeless leadership team. That's the city as well as housing sector representation that we've widened out to include representation from youth and justice, women, as part of this leadership team to think around housing and homelessness in a more integrated cross-sectionality learning. And there's been an accommodation for the coalition to have representation. So myself and Karen Green, my co-chair, are part of that committee as well, or that leadership team. And that's very much about learning together and finding solutions and making recommendations back to council and mayor for consideration. So we're at the front end of that relationship, but we've spent a good year and a half putting it together, and I think there's a lot of thoughtful people around the table that's got the expertise and the voice and the courage to bring bold recommendations and solutions for consideration by council. With respect to the AAO, probably the biggest development is related to Taywin and that development. And we've been very anxious to learn what the Algonquins of Ontario have intention in terms of development. We've met with the city on 2 occasions, including representation from Taggart and AAO. And I think the one thing that strikes us the most is there does not appear to be a commitment to Algonquin housing, let alone Indigenous housing, as part of that development. And they're telling us that, you know, it's too soon, it's too early. They've already got notional targets for the number of units that they like to create within that space for housing, but there doesn't seem to be any carve out or acknowledgement of Indigenous housing needs, and first and foremost for the Algonquin community members. And I know Mickey mentioned a number of 22,000 Indigenous people here in the city. That number is actually double that. It's the 10 service organizations that service directly through our groups, at least half of that population. But in fact, the real number is over 44,000 Indigenous people here in the city of Ottawa. And we have probably the representation from Indigenous groups from across the country that are here working primarily in Indigenous organizations, whether they're service, whether they're political, whether they're professional organizations that are based here in the city. We've got an incredibly diverse working population. And, you know, there's lots of opportunity, and that's where we have approached Taywin as a development to tell us how could we be involved, because we want to contribute. And we've put that question to people from AAO and to the city, as well as Taggart. So we're still, I think the jury's out in terms of getting a clear response. There's a willingness to include our voice, but we don't know what that looks like just yet.
Thank you for your candidness and,
Yeah.
sorry, Joan.
Yeah, Sean, I think for us, and maybe it's a question to you now, and you don't have to answer it, but it's a question to think about, which is your relationship with the Algonquin Anishinaabe people is one relationship. And then you have another relationship with urban Indigenous people. And I think every municipality that has a large Indigenous population is trying to figure that out. I think this city has the opportunity to really lead on it. Because when you come to an urban context, it becomes your second home. But for some of our young ones, this is their home. And they're Indigenous citizens of Ottawa. And what is your obligation as a municipality? Because their Section 35 rights still exist. You don't have to be on your reserve or in Inuit Nunavut to have your rights. You have obligations to be engaged with urban Indigenous people. And I don't think we've figured that out yet. It's not the same. And it's also not the same as the host nation. So I think that's one of the things we'd love to keep talking to you about is how do you understand your obligations and responsibilities to urban Indigenous people who have constitutional rights that are different from everybody else in the city, but are also citizens of this city, pay taxes, are contributing, and want to make the city better. So.
Thank you very much for your openness and candidness and for presenting to us in a good way. Appreciate you being here.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the update on all the initiatives that's happening. I just have one tiny question, a point of clarification. So you're looking on the federal lands, you want Tupper for the housing and homelessness, Indigenous housing hub, correct? I wasn't clear with respect to the Family Healing Lodge. That would be in a different location on a city property as of yet to be identified, correct? What are the space requirements for that Family Healing Lodge?
So in the conversations we've had with city staff, one of the things they've said is coming back from counselors is how important affordable housing is. So we're looking at whatever the space is, they would need a couple of acres, the Family Healing Lodge. And if it's a bigger space, that we would work with our housing providers to submit to CMHC for affordable housing so that we could have both depending on the size. It's not as big as Charles Tupper though. Just a couple acres. It's just a couple of acres the thing about the Family Healing Lodge, it has to have land because of the programming is land-based healing.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was just trying to understand that a little bit, but thank you very much for being here today in the update.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes, thank you very much for being here and giving us an update on all the incredible dream big projects you have on the go. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about the Indigenous Housing Hub. You referenced earlier in the slide deck, your goal is 1,000 homes by 2034. Will that site accommodate that goal? And is that an accurate timeline or I'm putting pressure on you here, but I'm just curious as to where you are in that process.
The Charles Tupper site is definitely not for 1,000 homes. We've got a number of relationships with a number of existing housing providers, including development opportunities and the creation or renovation of space. So again, it's not one particular site, and the relationships will continue to evolve. And I think the one important step to understand is that what we're trying to do is to provide choice to community. What type of housing, where it's located. So it could be in the south, it could be in the east, it could be in the west. And even as Gigno housing is evolved over 35 years, 60% of what Gigno is in Vanier. And we're in Vanier because that's where the greatest need. And when we had opportunity to purchase buildings, that's where we were maximizing our ability to buy as many units as possible to house community members. But over time, we now stretch from Orleans to Bell's Corners to Barhaven. So I often tell people, if you put us up on a map, we're like MasterCard, we're everywhere. But from a maintenance point of view, it's a real pain.
Yeah, I could imagine.
But I think ultimately the 1,000 homes, I don't think it's an unrealistic target. It's ambitious, but if you want to do something to make real change, you got to dream big. And that's what we're doing. And it really is about empowering people to have their choice where they want to live.
Absolutely. In terms of for whom the hub will serve, will it be a specific demographic, or is it, you know, anyone in the Indigenous Inuit community could access the facilities? For instance, we were talking about women and children, and I'm just wondering if there will be specific groups, or is it for everyone?
I think initially the approach is going to be focused on the provision of service and choice to Indigenous community members, but that doesn't preclude anything that's happening in that space that is a learning opportunity and an ability for us to share our knowledge and our cultural approaches to invite people from the wider community to be a part of that or to share in the development of that. We just don't know what that's going to look like. So we're not precluding anything at this point. And I think the notion, just as we've proceeded to evolve as organizations, we very much include outside opportunities. When we do a community gathering, it's not just for our community, it's an invitation to other people to come and learn and share and be part of what we're celebrating.
And my last question is, I think, and please correct me if I misheard, but you had indicated that the growth of the population is, you know, ramping up, that you're going, do you think 1,000 is ambitious enough? Or do you think you're going to see that you'll have to add more housing targets? I know lots of pressure on your shoulders. You're like, 1,000's enough, but if you're growing your population, do you think that that will be sufficient, or will you be coming back and giving us updates saying we have even more grander plans and we could like your partnership?
Just with the federal government on the Indigenous Housing Hub, they told us sometimes it takes like almost 10 years to transition. So our 1,000 housings, that doesn't even really include them. So as Mark said, we know what we want. We want services, we want community, but we're going to keep talking to everybody till we know what we're creating. Let's just say at Charles Tupper. And then, but the other 1,000 is what Mark said, like we've got units at Parkdale United, we've got 12 units at Sandy, like we're cobbling that together. So I think that 10-year goal will be met like within the 10 years, and then we're going to have another one, which I think will be probably significantly more. But we've never done development. Well, they do, housing providers, but I mean, that's one of the things you're helping us with is having somebody in OAC to help us do this, and working with Fortin, who's generously offered to develop our capacity, because and we have a lot of private developers coming to us, but we don't know how to assess them. You're learning.
Thank you so much for the presentation, for the updates, and for your ambition. And I look forward to the city continuing to partner with you going forward. Thank you very much.
Chair Leeper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation today. I saw a lot of attention being paid to it. I'm glad to hear that the city has been a good partner to you, and I don't have any reason to believe that that will ever change. I have two questions for you. The first of which is I'm gobsmacked by the number of people who are homeless almost immediately upon leaving care. I had no idea. How many people per year is that? Roughly.
So the numbers are quite high, and I can get you the actual numbers because we have an ED circle soon, and so Kelly, the CEO, provides us with those numbers. But it can be like as up to 60 children, youth a year.
So dozens of people a year,
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, she's on the CAS board. Do you have that information?
Not on hand, I don't, but it is over 60 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, staggering.
It's wild. Are people not coming out? Sorry, I don't want to spend the entire time talking about this, and it falls under the purview of some of our other committees, but I don't understand why they can't be better set up for success from the start. So.
And I guess that's why we walked away from some of the systems thinking that currently exists, because we don't understand that either, because what we have seen is the traffickers know where they are. They know and they're available. So why can't we be, like, as a community? Why are we not like an 18-year-old? And if anyone has an 18-year-old, they're still babies. And if you think about intergenerational trauma and doesn't know themselves, I mean, the vulnerability is so extreme. And so they're targeting our young ones, and we need a different response. And the Aging Out Initiative, the federal government's very interested in supporting us. It'll take years, and so what do we do in the interim is our pressing question.
I'm just gonna add on to that. I think I seen in the news yesterday that a mother and her child was almost abducted in Orleans during the day. Just into consideration, we have about 10, maybe a bit more Indigenous people being stolen in the dark of night. Not in the day, where they don't have anyone fighting or trying to help them survive. And so exactly, being able to come together as a community, looking at the systems that are in these supportive housing or these congregate living group homes, and seeing what systems they have inside that is damaging Indigenous community people when they leave the child welfare system one day after being released.
Okay, thank you for that answer. The media is watching, and I hope that they take some interest in that statistic. The second area that I want to look at, if the chair will indulge me for just 45 seconds or so, this Planning and Housing Committee frequently has applications for development approvals in front of us that frankly shouldn't probably be in front of us for things like shelter and supportive housing and things that I know every member of committee is supportive of, but the rules are the rules and they need new zoning. We start each of these meetings with an acknowledgement that speaks to the fact that we are on the unceded, and I'd like to add at the request of some community members, never surrender territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, and it does not sit well with me, and never has, that when we are looking at Indigenous housing providers, that the zoning rules apply. I don't know, it's above my pay grade to try to sort out the constitutional questions there. But when Indigenous housing providers own land, even under Canadian law, that you are still subject to zoning fights and things like the Baffin Larga were not this city's finest hour. I just want to make sure as we go through our comprehensive zoning bylaw review, that you are aware that that exercise is underway, that it has implications for where housing can go, and that you are being offered the opportunity to understand the implications of that and to provide your input into it. Because we're told that you are, that the Indigenous community, at least some part of the Indigenous community, has got a view into that. I know it's not a particularly sexy topic, zoning law, but I think it has profound implications for housing providers who are trying to address the crisis, and particularly for Indigenous housing providers who deal with the intersectionality of all the issues that lead to homelessness. So I'd love to hear that comfort, and if you can't give me that comfort, I'll commit to trying to make sure that we all have that comfort.
I cannot give you that comfort.
You can't?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Clear answer.
And can I suggest, like, going back to what we said earlier is, when you say Indigenous community, you're gonna need to be super clear. Are you talking about the urban Indigenous community? Because we have two housing providers that have like 500 units or over. Or are you talking about the Algonquin Anishinaabe people? And I don't think at this time they have any housing providers in the city of Ottawa. So like, it's just like, we are one community, but we're like all in a circle, but we also are distinct. And you have distinct, I would say, accountabilities to us in different ways.
Thank you for saying that. It is well taken. I understand your point, and you'll note I sort of caught myself there even saying it, that a part of the community has got a view into the zoning bylaw, because it is not just a monolithic Indigenous community that's here. Thank you.
I can assure you that we've did development in the city as a housing corporation, and we've been completely subject to the zoning bylaws and regulations, and have fought them and dealt with them and achieved success, but it's a very, very complex process.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing no more questions. Thank you to colleagues for your comments and questions, but especially thank you to your leadership, to the OAC. I think this is the first time you've ever presented formally at this committee. I know we've seen you at Ottawa Public Health, and every time I've had a presentation, it's been eye-opening and generated a lot of interesting discussion and a lot of follow-ups that we have. So I hope we can welcome you back here at a future date at Planning and Housing Committee, and perhaps some other committees within the city where your work intersects. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your presentation today. Miigwech. We do have to receive this report. Is this report received? Received. Thank you.
And as soon as we have a quorum of members back at the table, we'll resume. All right, so colleagues, our next item on the agenda is for 1495 Heron Road. We're going to receive a presentation from Ms. Kelly. Okay. And there is a technical item or a technical motion on this item. As soon as the vice chair is back. Vice Chair? Vice Chair? Glenn? So just ahead of the presentation, I just want to put a technical motion on the table. Vice Chair Gower.
I was going to say thank you to our guests, but that's okay. Whereas the report recommends amending the zoning bylaw to permit a range of residential and non-residential uses in low and mid-rise buildings at 1495 Heron Road. And whereas an amendment to the report is required to clarify the location of the theater that currently exists at the site and specifics of certain performance standards of the new zones. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning and Housing Committee amend the report by replacing document 2, details of recommended zoning, with the document titled Attachment 1 to this motion, and replacing document 3, zoning schedule, maximum building heights, with the document titled Attachment 2 to this motion. And therefore, be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act as amended.
That's a great motion. Ms. Kelly, we're in your hands.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Siobhan Kelly, and I'm a planner of the city. And this morning, I'll provide an overview of staff's recommendation for 1495 Heron Road. Next slide, please. 1495 Heron Road is an 18-acre site located at the intersection of Heron Road and Baycrest Drive in Alta Vista. The site is currently owned by Canada Lands Company, CLC, who is tasked with facilitating the redevelopment of the site as a mixed-use community with affordable housing. Adjacent land uses include city-owned park space to the north and the west, low-rise residential uses to the east, institutional uses to the immediate south, and then further south of Heron Road is Heron Gate, which currently consists of townhouses and apartment buildings and is planned for mid to high-rise redevelopment up to 25 stories in the next 20 to 30 years. Next slide, please. The site was formerly the Campanile campus, a religious and educational campus built in the 1960s by Les Sœurs de la Congrégation de Notre-Dame. On the left, we can see an archival image showing the chapel and the campanile, which means bell tower, but in Italian, and my poor accent. Following the closure of the campus in 1973, the federal government used the site as the Federal Study Center for training public servants. Next slide, please. So the site currently contains 12 buildings, most of which were built as part of the Campanile campus. The site stands as a rare and excellent example of a modern campus. And on October 8th, the Built Heritage Committee recommended staff's recommendation to designate the property for its cultural heritage value. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the site's history, some of which I already covered. So in 2020, the federal government transferred the property to CLC. And between 2021 and 2022, CLC led a public engagement process to develop a master plan for the site. In May 2023, CLC submitted this zoning bylaw amendment application in addition to a concurrent plan of subdivision. About a year later, in August 2024, CLC listed the site on the Canada Public Lands Bank, a mapping tool to identify surplus federal lands. At the same time, CLC requested that the plan of subdivision be placed on hold. Following the rezoning, CLC intends to solicit interest in the site and to take the site to market. In terms of next steps, future development applications will be required to facilitate development on the site. Next slide, please. It's important to note that committee is not considering a development proposal today and is only considering a zoning bylaw amendment. However, to show how the site could redevelop in the future, a concept plan was prepared. The concept plan is shown on the screen in addition to a rendering, and it contemplates the retention of 9 of the 12 existing buildings on site and the addition of approximately 1,100 dwelling units and 7,600 square meters of non-residential uses. Next slide, please. Currently, the site is zoned minor institutional and is subject to urban exception 325 and a maximum height limit of 21 meters. The proposal seeks to rezone most of the site to general mixed use, subject to a new urban exception. It's a pretty lengthy exception, but at a high level, it includes permissions to permit additional uses such as a cinema, hotel, and below-grade parking garage, to prohibit other non-residential uses within 50 meters of the adjacent residential zone, and to establish setbacks and other performance standards. The amendment also seeks to rezone the northwest portion of the site to a dual open space and minor institutional zone, which I'll discuss a bit further in a moment. Lastly, the amendment seeks to rezone a corridor along the entire north and east property line to O1. Staff is also recommending that the amendment include a holding symbol to address 3 specific items. The first being a heritage impact assessment to ensure future development is compatible and conforms with the designating bylaw. Second, a functional servicing study to confirm adequate municipal services. And 3, a provision to secure parkland dedication in the future. Next slide, please. The proposed amendment also seeks to introduce a new height schedule. The schedule proposes low and mid-rise building heights with consideration given to the existing buildings on site, key views, and adjacent land uses. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the northwest corner of the site is proposed for a dual zone to provide some flexibility. CLC is having ongoing discussions with 2 school boards to secure lands for a potential school. If a school develops in this location, the holding provision will ensure that the city can obtain a minimum 5,000 square meters for parkland. In the case that a school site does not develop in this location, the city would acquire the entire area for parkland dedication in the future. Next slide, please. From a policy perspective, the city's official plan designates the site minor corridor and neighborhood in the Outer Urban Transact. The minor corridor designation applies to the first 120 meters of the site measured from Heron Road, and the remainder is designated neighborhood and subject to the evolving neighborhoods overlay. Next slide, please. As proposed, the addition of residential and non-residential uses aligns with the official plan's broad policy direction for 15-minute neighborhoods and is compatible with the surrounding context. The height schedule conforms with the official plan, which permits 6 stories in the corridor designation. Within the portion of the site designated neighborhood, the official plan permits low-rise buildings, but also allows greater building height where the existing zoning permits taller buildings. In this case, the existing zoning permits 21 meters as of right, which equates to 6 stories. The proposed amendment seeks to increase the building height up to 9 stories in strategic locations while lowering building heights in others. As proposed, the zoning bylaw amendment supports the conservation of the site as a modernist campus while setting the stage for future development opportunities. Next slide, please. Appropriate transition to the existing low-rise residential dwellings to the east is achieved by way of the height schedule, which limits maximum building heights to 4 and 6 stories in this area. The applicant is also proposing a conservative 14.25 meter O1 zone along the east property line. In combination with building setbacks, this provides a minimum 17.25 meter separation distance. I'll note that there have been concerns raised regarding the arrangements of building heights on site. This arrangement is due to the location of the existing buildings, the protection of key views, the policy context, and adjacent sensitive land uses. Next slide, please. Thank you, committee members. In conclusion, staff are recommending that committee approve the zoning bylaw amendment, and we're available to respond to any questions.
Siobhan, thank you very much. In this case, the developer, which of course is Canada Lands, has opted to receive the kick. So we'll hear from delegations before moving to the developer. So the first public delegation will be Maureen Drouin with the Guildwood Residents Association. Oui, merci.
Thank you very much.
Alors, est-ce que vous pouvez... bienvenue.
Welcome. You have 5 minutes for your presentation. All right, so we'll go ahead. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, councillors, hello. My name is Maureen Drouin, Secretary of the group, and unfortunately, our president is not able to be present, and our vice president is caught up in work. Therefore, we have asked our members to follow these deliberations by video. You will have received document 7 of the staff report talking about our comments, what we agree with, what we don't agree with, and our detailed information as well. Today, we want to make sure we give you the context and come back on the salient points that we are looking to get your support on. And we have 3 points related to our request. Next slide. So here's the summary of our activities over the 3.5 years, continued work on this complex topic. We have identified a key point. In zoning, we have conducted exhaustive research referring to our options as suggested by you, Mr. Chair, and the PPS, all of the committee information from the council, archives from the city, and some jurisprudence. Next slide. The vision that you have here is the one that we have proposed at the beginning, and this is what we are coming back to. The new context is good, and this has been added to the land use for affordable housing and for other public use. The site can be rented for a nominal point for 89 years for a not-profit corporation. Official languages necessitates a consultation with the communities who are in a minority situation to take into account their needs rather. And Health Ontario will use the neighborhood healthcare plan, which is also very important for the site.
Skip the next one, please, and we go to the next one.
Next slide, and the next one. Here you see the main points of our position relating to the rezoning application. We highlighted that the site, that is part of the important part of Gilbert Estates, it's not beside, it is an integral part, and of a natural zone. Plan 6134D, non-residential lands need to be at a small scale, compatible, and complementary to the community. We would therefore ask you for additional points that we're against and that are put together in our brief. Hotel and cinema, for example, when it comes to restaurants, that should be limited to the corridor.
Now, if we go to the next slide.
Next slide, please.
Is another story. It's a little bit more complex, and here are the highlights, which are detailed in the memorandum. The valid urban exception 325, which we identified, was created in 1998 to accommodate the 2 non-6-story residences already under a 1963 height exception in the new minor institutional category rather, that prescribed a maximum building height of 11 meters, then 13.5 meters. Thus, this is a specific exemption correcting an anomaly and not a change or confirmation in height category according to our association. Slide, please. GRA believes that allowing an increase to 9 stories is not in line with the policy intent of the official plan for neighborhoods, and that the wording of OP 6.3.12 and Section 3.2 Policy 14 should be revised to eliminate the ambiguity and clarify the scope of the relevant provisions. I refer you to our memorandum for the detailed analysis with references to the OP. Slide, please. The official plan provides in relation to neighborhoods a specific policy converting unutilized institutional sites to a majority low-rise residential use in neighborhoods. For GRA, the specific policy 7 overrides the OP 3.2 policy 14, general permission permitting height increases in the same category. This is a recognized rule of legislative interpretation. GRA supports a maximum building height of 6 stories, urban exception for a minority area of the neighborhood portion. As such, we request the committee refer to our memorandum and modify its approval recommendation to council accordingly. Slide, please. Informed by demonstrated community needs stats that you have here, which I hope they are, yes, fully supports the possibility of using the site for a bilingual not-for-profit village for seniors, a recognized vulnerable population. Slide, please. In addition to the site suitability that you have listed here for a seniors village and reuse of heritage building, it would be a proactive measure to ensure that homelessness of the vulnerable group of seniors not be increased with the demographic silver tsunami already started. Slide, please. Our third request is that the committee ensure the zoning will enable the senior village vision as seen here and can additionally include independent and assisted living, affordable rent-geared income and accessible housing options, small-scale retail services, medical offices, clinics, PSW, training, support, home, palliative and respite care, and research on age-related illnesses. GRA supports the nonprofit bilingual housing provider that has already demonstrated a great interest in the site. Slide, please. And so we ask you to consider and make sure that this favors and facilitate whatever decisions you make, facilitate such an endeavor. May I just thank the committee for its attention, our Councillor Marty Carr and her staff for availability and support, and the planning office's staff, especially for the professionalism and shared expertise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Twang. Councillor Carr?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Maureen. Very much. Je vais parler en anglais parce que c'est plus facile pour moi ce matin.
I'll be speaking in English because it's easier for me today.
I want to really thank Maureen and Lynn and Paul and the other members of the Guildwood Residents Alliance. I have been involved in this file prior to being elected, so have been involved with them for quite some time when I was the Community Association president. They have worked very hard on this file. They have done a fantastic job of engaging with the neighbors, keeping people informed, certainly learned themselves a lot about the planning process. But I participated with Lynn as the president. She's away on a cruise right now. Oh, am I allowed to say that? She's not here right now.
Well deserved.
Well deserved. And she and I were on the Public Advisory Committee with Canada Lands. I think it was 2020 now, 2021, but spent a lot of time together on the application. So I've indicated to them that I will be supporting the application today. I understand the community's concerns. With respect to this application, because it's only a rezoning now, we, of course, we're waiting to see who the developer will be. But I mostly just wanted to thank you and express all my gratitude towards all of you for the past couple of years, keeping everyone up to date. And I'll continue to work with you and the association as we move forward with this.
Thank you. And it was quite a trip going through the official plan and differences in interpretations that can come out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. And yeah, some of my questions to staff will be around that question of whether or not this does adhere to the official plan. Your assertion would be that it does not. I'm curious to see from staff why they feel that it does. But I think your assertion would be that they should be seeking an official plan amendment in addition to the zoning. So we'll have an opportunity to address that with Siobhan.
That was our point of view at one point in the process. I'm not sure that it probably does go back to that or finish with that. But our objective here was to show that this was an exception, that you're building on an exception, specific exception to correct an anomaly and going to make it generalized per a general a policy, whereas there are a lot of specifics referring to in the official plan on the neighborhoods and the majority low rise. And although the 6 stories falls within that category of mid-rise, we feel that it's a specific, and it was not converted as a was not done as a mid-rise, but rather to correct an anomaly. So there's some nonsense there for us.
Okay.
And so we think that we're quite aware and willing to have the 6, a majority 6 building, but as a minority, as indicated in all of the official plan documents.
And that is my second question for you, is the difference between 6 and 9. I know the location well. I think my in-laws are members of your association. They're in close proximity to the site. What in your association's members' view is the difference between that 6 and that 9? I'll be supporting this, I think, unless I hear something that I haven't before, but the difference between 6 and 9 is really minimal from a visual perspective, and it allows more people to be able to live in a great location.
That may be true, and I'm not disputing that. However, it is 3 stories higher. It is, as presented to us, not just a minority 1 or maybe 2 buildings, but more than that. And we feel that it takes away from the heritage building. It doesn't, in any case, I'm not sure that a seniors village or long-term care would go beyond, a nonprofit would go beyond the 6, so it doesn't stop that. And to us, it's just more in context, particularly since this site is part and parcel of Gilwood Estates, which is 1 and 2 level, which may come to change with the new zoning, but for the moment, that's what it is. And we think that it's more appropriate and that it follows the history that we've been able to outline through our research and archives, et cetera. And so we would like that to be taken into consideration, just in case something else happens and there's another type of developer that goes in there.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the work that your association has done. I know you've been rigorous and put a lot of effort into this. I don't see any other questions for you, so we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Mark Reardon, who is here with us in the building. Come on down, Malk, and good morning. Thank you for joining us. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
My name is Mark Reardon. I never sat at this illustrious circle before, so I'm a little bit in awe. I think I agree with Maureen. The particular things that I represent a group that are mainly alumni from the past Notre Dame, St. Pat's community. And there's a lot of us actually. I'm discovering, I've just got this a couple of days ago to speak to. So the main thing I think that we want to preserve is the architectural integrity. What we have here is a very unique heritage structure. It's unique 1960s. Again, not you know, we're not talking about 100 years, 200 years. But it's something that's a very fine example of that. And there's actually a PhD student that did her master's thesis on this in architecture at Carleton, Kathleen Chin, which I could send to you if you like. And she's very concerned about the reuse of this, preserving the heritage aspects of it, the architectural heritage. Could I ask you to put up that last couple of slides we had on there for just the outline of the building?
Yeah, I'm not sure who has access to the slide deck. Can you please put it up? The delegate?
I would agree with Maureen that the height restriction is a problem, particularly from the viewpoint from Heron Road. If you put a 9-story building there, you're not going to see the theater, which is again, it's probably one of the most unique theaters, and it's definitely from an architectural point of view, it's a theater. It's not an auditorium, it's a theater. And there was an awful lot of concepts there, which at the time were very modern, very new. The chapel, see, if you look at those buildings there, if those buildings go up to 9 stories, see the buildings in the front, you're not going to see it. The whole structure, including all of the buildings, the chapel, the theater, and all of the administration, library, all of that type of thing, they're already there within that whole quadrangle surrounding the Campanile quadrangle. I think the height restrictions would be, I think they're fine at the back. The new zoning changes would be fine at the back. That's fine. If you put up some taller buildings there, it's going to be fine. But if you put up taller buildings there in the front like that, it's going to completely obscure the whole thing and destroy the whole view that you have. So I think we have a lot of concerns about that. Today, I realize I'm coming at a bit of a Johnny-come-lately type of thing. And I was hoping that the best we could do is perhaps maybe get a deferral or a postponement of the zoning change so that we can study this a bit further. I know that there are many members of our group that are very interested in this. Particularly, you know, again, I didn't realize Guildwood Estates was going to be here as well with a representative as well. Would it be possible to ask for that?
Just procedurally, yes, a member could make a motion to defer this. I'll have a comment. You still have a minute left in your presentation.
Cool. I guess that, again, it's we'd like to look at the architectural heritage of this, and that's what we're really most worried about, that's not going to be preserved.
Okay, thank you very much. I will just note our heritage staff are here. This did go through the Heritage Committee. I've lost track of time, a week ago, week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Where did the time go? So we'll have an opportunity to pose some of your questions to the to our heritage staff. And I know your counselor, or the counselor for the area, Councillor Carr, has a question for you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks very much for your delegation. I think we'll cover this in staff, but so there has been an extended consultation process on this property that started in 2020, and extensive consultations with Canada Lands and the public advisory community. There was community consultations as well. We had the original architect even come to one of the meetings as well, and heritage planners from both the city and from the consultant have been involved. The height in the front, is only 6 stories. The 9 stories is in the back from Heron Road.
And how many stories above the chapel would that be?
So,
And the theater?
yeah, we'll get that clarified when we speak. But the other thing is, this is only a rezoning application. It's not a site plan application.
Right.
So whoever the developer is, they can develop, we're just getting the heights zoned. So there will be another process for the site plan at a later date.
But by changing the zoning, you'll allow them to put those
They could
buildings up
they
there?
will be able to put up to 6 stories in
9
the front,
or-
9 in the back. Yeah,
Or a 9-story?
yeah.
In
the back.
In the front?
No, not 9 stories in the front, 9 stories in the back.
Can we reduce the height for the 9 stories in the front or 6 stories in the front? The 6 stories is pretty high compared to the buildings that are there. It's laid out as being, I think the tallest building there is probably about 3 stories.
Yeah,
Which is
but
one of the residences.
Heron Road's a minor corridor, so it's allowed up to 6 stories. Like that's as of right zoning on 6 stories, I think. I'll run through it with staff to make sure that, because I'll ask the questions to staff. But as of
Okay.
right, there's allowed to be 6 stories on Heron Road.
Okay, and would the Heritage Committee be able to ask them if they could keep it at, say, 3 stories there?
It's already been voted on the Heritage Committee. We've already had Heritage
Yeah.
Committee approvals,
Okay.
about 4 weeks ago.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's late in the game, but there will be, when there's a site plan application, there will be, more consultation, perhaps, depends what the site plan looks like, I guess. If it's just staff approved, but, there will be updates on the process. It's just a rezoning that's happening today.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I would make the point that basically if you put a large number of buildings in front of it, there's no point to any architectural heritage if you can't see it. It's like putting large buildings around Parliament Hill, put, skyscrapers around Parliament Hill. What's the point of keeping it? Nobody can see it.
So I don't want to get too much in, it's generally ask the delegation questions and you get to answer the questions but procedurally, a member could, after hearing from our heritage staff, put a motion forward to say cap the height, but there would have to be a rationale for it. And so that is a potential. We'll see how it goes over the course of the next 15, 20 minutes. Thank you very much for your presentation today. I don't see any further questions for you. Appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
Which leaves us with the folks from Canada Lands, Eric Bays, Taylor Marquis, and Mary Jarvis. We'll find a chair for Mary there, please. Good morning, and thanks for being here. You have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name's Eric Bays. I'm a senior urban planner with Stantec, and we've helped to lead the master planning process and the development approval process to date. I think that Ms. Kelly did a fulsome review of what we're requesting today. But I did want to give the committee a sense of the project's recent history, how it's evolved since its inception, as well as some of the next steps until it's fully realized. And I'll pass it over to Taylor to introduce herself and CLC.
And we can go to the next slide. So I'm Taylor Marquis, Director of Real Estate at Canada Lands, overseeing this project. So Canada Lands is a self-financing crown corporation and the real estate development arm of the Government of Canada, specializing in real estate and development. So for almost 30 years, our mission has been to ensure the innovative and commercially sound redevelopment and reintegration of surplus Government of Canada properties into local communities. So several of our projects in Ottawa include Waterridge Village near the Rockcliffe Airport, Booth Street Complex in 299 Carling near Preston, and then we're currently working with Public Services and Procurement Canada on the future of Confederation Heights and Tunney's Pasture. So we're working hard with all levels of government to unlock these underused federal lands for housing to meet our 5-year target of over 29,000 new homes, with a minimum of 20% of those being affordable housing. Next slide.
So there's 5 guiding principles that were distilled into the master plan to create a sustainable community that builds on the existing and the new open spaces. The conservation of built heritage. One of the reasons why 2 weeks ago on October 8th, the existing buildings were designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. A mid-rise community for a range of housing types. A community with amenities that serves residents and visitors, and ensuring that residents from different life stages and different economic means can call the community home. Next slide, please. The site there was a proactive and voluntary public engagement process that CLC proceeded through on this site starting in the spring of 2021. It included online public engagement and workshops, public advisory committee that others have spoken about today. There is also word spread via postcards, social media, news ads, and community associations. Next slide, please. We received broad community feedback on the end community interest that fed into the concept development and refinement over the process. So some of the items that we did shift, those are in the row to the right. The shifting of the mid-rise buildings that were proposed to the west to make sure that there was a generous transition from mid-rise buildings down towards the established low-rise communities to the east. The creation of a 14.25 meter wide blue-green corridor that provides a strip that can accommodate both vegetation as well as stormwater management for anyone who still uses SAE. That's at 46 feet. Limiting certain non-residential uses within 50 meters of the existing R1 zones, again to the east of the property, and ensuring that retirement home and residential care facilities are 2 uses that are permitted by the new zoning across the entirety of the site. Next slide, please. Just in terms of project timeline, so all of this began in the spring of 2021 with public engagement, the assessment of existing environmental features, the heritage attributes. We moved on after that to the initial applications that were submitted in 2023. That was for zoning and a draft plan of subdivision. In the spring of this year, Canada's housing plan was released that proposes 250,000 homes be constructed through existing and former public lands. And this prompted a need to revise the application, and we're moving forward with the zoning amendment now. Our attempt was to simplify and create a more flexible zoning while still ensuring that the core message, the key components of the master plan are completed. And then if there's enough time for the next, can I actually switch to the next one after this?
You are out of time.
Okay.
Did you want to present a final slide? And I'm sure the counselor probably has some questions for you.
No, I think that's everything, Mr. Chair. I think that's a good final slide to end on.
I was mistaken in my assumptions. Okay, so are there any questions from members? Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few process questions. When did the zoning application formally get submitted to the City of Ottawa?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that was in April 2023.
Okay, and when did the federal government acquire this property from the school board?
So the property was acquired from the school board in 1972.
And it's been a federal government facility since then?
Yeah, so yeah, it was used as a facility until 2014, I believe.
Okay,
or 12, sorry, 2012, and then CLC acquired it. Sorry, it was, sorry, there's a few steps here, sorry.
sure.
It was used until 2012. It was formally declared surplus in 2014, and then subsequently CLC acquired it.
And so, what has the building and property been used for the last decade?
It has been vacant.
Vacant, okay. Not a criticism of you three or your corporation, but feds still in the city have surplus property that they're literally sitting on and doing nothing with. So I'm very happy to see this proposal. I will be supporting the recommendations, but to our federal partners out there, we've got to get going. There's a lot of big dreams and a lot of pre-election talk, but we need to see properties move. So happy to see this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. The decision to put 6 and 9-story buildings on the property, I'm assuming, sorry, I'll let you explain to me why those decisions were made. I'm assuming it's a certain amount of economics in order to make the numbers work, but can you tell me why the buildings aren't shorter?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So the property, as Ms. Kelly mentioned, is designated as minor corridor along the front, and that's measured 120 meters from the center line of Heron Road going back. The site is deeper than that, which means the balance of it is designated as neighborhood with an evolving overlay in it. And all the overlay fundamentally means is that these are parts of the city that are likely to evolve into a more urban, compact, 15-minute neighborhood supporting built form over a shorter span of time. The policies for the minor corridor are quite clear that the maximum building height permitted is 6 stories. There is nuance provided in the neighborhood designation, and I believe the intent was recognizing that there are parts of the city that are now designated neighborhood in the official plan that have heights greater than the 4 stories permitted in a neighborhood, according to the policy.
Sorry, I'll jump in. You're giving me the planning rationale as to why the height is justified according to the city's policies and plans. But you have a parcel of land. Why would you not propose something lower that would be better received by the most immediate neighbors?
So I guess we can say we've tried to balance, I guess, everybody's interests. So along the edges closer to the existing neighborhood, we are intending it to be a more lower use, but you're correct. With the retention of the heritage buildings across the site, that provides some economic pressures on a pro forma in terms of its reuse and adaptability. So we wanted to ensure that there was some flexibility where in spots we thought were appropriate on the site. So again, further back. And then very delicately around the retained heritage buildings, the conservation guidelines go into great depth in terms of where that 9 is permitted and how it's supposed to be and set back from the existing. But yes, to help a little bit with the economics, if I can say frankly. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarity and directness on that. I don't have any further questions for you. If any other members have questions for the delegation, no, thank you very much for your presentation today. And we can move into questions of staff. I do think in light of, oh, sorry, there we go, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yeah, just in terms of what the community has mentioned, and the need for housing for seniors. The zoning fits, obviously. But I just wonder what it would take for, would it be a nonprofit or that would have to approach, or possibly private for long-term care or retirement home type living? Just wanted to get your opinion on what the chances are of those options.
Thank you for the question through you, Mr. Chair. So the zoning does support these uses in the GM zone. So that includes residential care facility and retirement home. In terms of the chance of that developing. I can't confirm. It really depends on who acquires the site, who they partner with. CLC does have a pretty extensive pre-development phase where they work with developers to decide who can ultimately develop the site. So that would be essentially determined at that time.
So the gatekeeper on who decides, is it Canada Lands?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's my understanding, yes.
Oh darn, I should ask them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other members' questions. I do have, I think, one of my own. I'm not going to ask about the requirement for an official plan amendment because I heard the delegation say they recognize that there are likely policies in the official plan that support this. But Leslie, I'm just wondering if you could address you see your hand up previously. I'll ask my question. We'll get to wrap up. Can I just ask you to address the delegation's concern with respect to hiding the auditorium, the theater?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as was mentioned, this item was considered for designation under Part 4 of the Heritage Act at the October 8th Built Heritage Committee. And it was carried, and it will go to council with this zoning bylaw amendment on October 30th. In terms of the height piece, it's something that we very much carefully considered, and is part of why we wanted to do the zoning and the heritage designation concurrently, because it allows council to carefully consider the impacts of a potential future development on the heritage values of the site as we're sort of describing them. So in terms of the theater and the visibility from Heron Road, one of the things we looked at with this site is that it is very much a self-contained campus. While it is visible from Heron Road and we have that really amazing axial view towards the chapel from the driveway and from the sort of intersection of Baycrest Drive, it really does kind of turn in on itself. It's not really a highly visible attribute along Heron Road. So it's not something that we protected through the heritage, or recommended that council protect through the heritage designation.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other members' questions. I want to thank CLC for running a good consultation process. I'm struck by the difference at this parcel from Tunney's pasture, which we're looking at, multiple towers, a very, very dense one at 6 to 9 stories. This is clearly a fairly sensitive infill that probably warrants support. Is this carried? Thank you very much, members. Oh, sorry, the technical motion. Glenn's awesome technical motion. Is that carried? Okay, and now as amended, the report is carried. Don't look at me like that. I'm an okay chair. I'm an okay chair. We're going to move on to the development charges. I assume that members just want to push through and finish up the development charges item. Yep. Fantastic. We got to do it. We've got to do this item. We have to do the development charges. Which staff are giving us the presentation? Gary? Gary, you're it. So just a couple of things to keep in mind as we move forward. There is a technical motion. I think I'll ask for that now from Vice Chair Gower.
I was going to read the first 2 pages.
Don't read it, just, okay, it's on screen.
Whereas the amending development charge background study was provided on the city's website on August 30th, 2024. And whereas a link to the amending development charge background study was provided within the staff report on page 9, but by inadvertence, the hyperlink at document 1 did not link to the background study. And whereas there are additional information and proposed bylaw changes that will not change the development charge rates to be imposed pursuant to the amending bylaw attached as document 2, be it resolved that committee receive the replacement document 1, the 2024 development charge amendment background study dated August 30th, 2024, prepared by Hempson. Receive as document 3, the Hempson report dated October 10th, 2024, amending the background study appended to this motion as attachment 1. Receive as document 4 the changes made to the calculated development charge rate since August 30th, 2024, appended to this motion as attachment 2. Approve that the sentence on page 9 of the report, the 2024 Development Charges Amendment Background Study dated October 11th, 2024, was made available on ottawa.ca prior to the October 23rd, 2024 public meeting, be revised to read the 2024 Development Charges Amendment Background Study dated August 30th, 2024, was made available on ottawa.ca on August 30th, 2024, and the amending study dated October 10th, 2024, was made available on ottawa.ca on October 21st, 2024. Be it further resolved that the recommendations in the report be replaced with the following: that Planning and Housing Committee recommend Council approve the 2024 Development Charge Amendment Background Study set forth in Document 1 as amended by Document 3. The citywide development charge bylaw, the amendment in accordance with Document 2, that pursuant to the Development Charges Act, subsection 12(3), no further public meeting is necessary. Be it further resolved that Document 2 be amended to include the following as an amendment to Bylaw 2024-218. The subtotal and total lines in this bylaw provide information at the time of the enactment of this bylaw or the subsequent amendments thereto, but do not affect the determination of the development charges imposed by this bylaw. Be it further resolved that the office of the city clerk be directed to include the revised report and supporting documents in the report to council. That's it.
No one should ever want to be vice chair of a committee. Let that be your warning. Well, let's move into the presentation. Gary, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Chair. Sure. So this is just this particular amendment is concerning the infrastructure master plan that was approved in June. We're doing an amendment to the water and wastewater rates to reflect those changes to the list of projects that were included in the infrastructure master plan. There are some other minor adjustments to the project lists, and there's also some extraneous changes being proposed to the bylaw to kind of reflect the various legislative changes that have occurred over the last 4 or 5 years. Next slide, please. So the agenda, we're briefly going to go over what currently development charges are paying for. We're also going to look at this particular update of the water and wastewater development charge rates. We're going to look at some of the timelines that have transpired over the last number of months. We're going to look at some municipal DC comparison of rates on the residential side, just kind of a brief examination of those. We're going to look at the proposed rates that reflect the new water and wastewater calculated charges. And of course, some of the report recommendations. We're going to do a brief overview of those. Next slide, please. So this just gives you kind of an overview of the various service categories that the city has currently in place, and then we're collecting development charges to fund. I guess the breakdown of the service categories can be generally it's general services such as public transit, parks, recreation, libraries, and then engineered services such as roads and related services, water, sanitary, stormwater drainage. It's a little bit interesting in the development charge world. Public transit isn't thought of as being a kind of a engineered service. It's more categorized as a general service. So those are the current items that we're collecting development charges to fund, and these adjustments, as I mentioned, are just to the water and wastewater components of those various service categories. Next slide, please. So besides making changes to the calculation of the development charge rates, we're also looking at making some adjustments to the bylaw itself. So as you can see, we're updating the calculations for water and wastewater based on the 2024 INP, which was now reflects the official plan and 2046 planning horizon. We're also doing, making some adjustments to the projects that are listed under Parks and Recreation. We're not changing the rates, but just reflecting some adjustments and corrections to how those particular projects are being funded and from what sources. We're also going to be removing some of the exemptions that we currently have in our bylaw. And those the four that we're considering removing are listed below. Nonprofit housing, because there's now a provincial statutory exemption. Nonprofit healthcare facility, because of the way the development charges are collected. We're hoping that the province would pay those fees on behalf of the new Ottawa hospital. The third one is a public facility. Because of this items included in the bylaw, if something gets exempted as a public facility, the city is required to offset those costs. So any non-statutory exemptions, the municipality is required to make up that funding shortfall. So by removing this, we're hoping to mitigate some of the revenue loss that we've occurred over the last number of years by having this exemption in place. And then finally, there's coach houses. It's no longer required because of the many legislative changes that have occurred since 2019. I believe there's been 9 amendments to the Development Charges Act. Coach houses are now a statutory exempt as an auxiliary unit to an existing townhome, semi-detached and single-family home. So these are more or less housekeeping changes that were being proposed to include in this amendment. Next slide, please. So in addition, there's to this, in this update, we're looking at making some specific changes to the bylaw. In particular, there's a section that was included in the 2014 DC bylaw that now has been deemed to be redundant since that particular development has occurred. So we're going to remove section 16(2) and 3 from the bylaw so that that particular analysis will no longer be used to determine when development charges are payable. In addition, under Bill 138, the province has allowed for the payment of development charges in 5 installments in certain cases. So this is also has made this particular clause or clauses in the bylaw redundant. We're looking at making changes to the redevelopment land credits. In particular, we're providing a clearer definition of what actually is a derelict building. It's going to be more clearly defined in the bylaw. But in addition, we're looking at making changes that would exempt the redevelopment of heritage properties from the application of this 5-year window that's currently in place. So we're making a combination of a couple of changes concerning derelict buildings, and hopefully there will be a list of those particular properties that would be designated as being eligible for redevelopment under the Heritage Act, and would have this capability of being allowed to have credits applied to the redevelopment if necessary. The next change that's being proposed is on the date of indexation. In 2019, we proposed at that time to move the date from August 1st to April 1st, 2020. There were some concerns about notice being given of those changes and adjustments to the rates. So it was shifted from April 1st to October 1st for the last 5 years. So now we're attempting to shift it back from October 1st to April 1st, but making, again, changes so that the notification requirement would be, the rates that are going to be used to update those development charges would be released sometime in November versus February. And this hopefully will provide more lead time for developers and stakeholders to adjust their building permit applications, so that they would potentially be able to submit them and not be subject to this particular April 1st indexation date. Plus, in the bylaw itself, we're proposing in 2025 not to index the water and wastewater components, since those are being updated as as part of this amendment process. So it would only be the other service categories that were listed in the earlier slide that would be subject to whatever the indexation rate will be published by Statistics Canada as of November. And finally, there's a myriad of changes being made to definitions in the bylaw to provide better clarity. We hired a consultant to look at our bylaw in particular. He did an examination of other bylaws. We went through those various definitions, and he's made some changes to help staff at building code to more easily define what is and isn't a use, or what type of rate should be used to calculate the development charges. So hopefully it will reduce issues that we've had, ongoing issues that the city's had under Section 20 of the Act, where someone can challenge the payment of development charges within a 90-day window. So we're hoping these changes will reduce those numbers of submissions that have been made over the years under Section 20 of the Act. Next slide, please. So I think Councillor Gower went through the technical amendments. I thank him for that. So just trying to make sure that everything is linked properly, and all the documentation that is associated with the report that's going forward today are correct. So you see there's 4 sets of documents, and hopefully those links are now adjusted to make sure that everyone has the correct information. Next slide, please. So this is what I mentioned earlier. This is a comparison of development charge rates for single-family dwellings in the province of Ontario. It's only a very small snapshot of the over 200 municipalities that have DC bylaws in place. But it gives an idea of how we compare to some of the major municipalities in Ontario. And as you can see that the top 2, the region of City of Vaughan and City of Markham, have the highest or near the top of the list in development charge rates for single family dwellings. And as you can see, the next list is Brampton and Mississauga would be 3rd and 4th on this particular examination. And as I think I mentioned yesterday during some of the presentations, that I think that it's due in part for a variety of factors. But of course, I think the most important one, in my opinion, would be that they're still under a 2-tier system of local versus regional government, where you have kind of an independent process for updating development charge bylaws. And so that each level kind of submits their list of priorities, and they get bundled together and form a development charge rate that's applied at building permit issuance. Comparing now for single tier municipalities, of course, Toronto and Barrie are slightly, again, 97,000 and 89,000. The city of Hamilton is at 67,000. I always find Hamilton is a very good comparator to Ottawa, since they have an urban, suburban, and rural mix. They were amalgamated at the same time as we were. And so it kind of provides a good comparator of how our rates compare to other, maybe more specific municipalities. As you can see, our rates are for outside Greenbelt are currently listed at 62,500, and inside Greenbelt at 55,198. And then finally, the City of London is below that. But there's, I think I have a list of all 200, or not all 200, but about 150 municipalities, and how the City of Ottawa compares on a residential and non-residential basis to those municipalities. Next slide, please. So now we're getting to the actual rates and how they compare. As you're probably aware, the city applies development charges for residential uses on a 3-area basis: inside Greenbelt, outside Greenbelt, and rural area. So these are the proposed changes to the inside Greenbelt rates. There's a 7% increase being recommended today, as we're comparing what the current charge is as of October 1st, which, as I mentioned earlier, is our indexation date. That indexation as of October 1st reflected changes in the non-residential construction price index for 2023. And it was applied as of October 1st, 2024. And those numbers are being compared to the revised rates being proposed today. And as you can see, the difference in value, in dollar value, and in percentage. The next slide, please. So the next area, major area or component is, of course, outside the Greenbelt. Again, it's a 2% increase across all the various uses. Comparing again the October 1st, 2024 index rates versus the revised rates at this time. And then next slide, please. And this is the rural comparison where, again, there's a 2% increase across the various uses, residential uses. The current charge, again, as of October 1st, versus the revised rates. And then next slide, please. And then, of course, in the rural unserviced area, there's no requirement to pay for water and wastewater if you're not utilizing central services. So there is no percentage change in or dollar value change in the rates compared to October 1st, because they're not impacted by this particular amendment, which is, as I mentioned earlier, changing the rate structure for just water and wastewater services. Next slide, please. So this is the non-residential, the comparison again of the rates which are applied on a citywide basis for industrial and non-industrial uses. There's a slight change, a slight increase in the industrial rate by 2%-ish. And then the non-industrial rate is actually going down by approximately 1%. Again, those rates are applied on a citywide basis. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the definitional changes in the bylaw will help clarify what exactly is a non-industrial use versus an industrial use. So as you can see, there's quite a difference in the application of development charges if something is deemed to be industrial versus non-industrial. So some of those changes to the definitions that are being proposed are an attempt to clarify that distinction between those two uses. Next slide, please. So on the non-residential rural unserviced, there's no change in the rates because again, the water and wastewater services are not impacted by those by this particular amendment, since they don't pay those charges at building permit issuance. Next slide, please. So this kind of gives you an overview of a brief overview of the timelines. Of course, the infrastructure master plan has been ongoing for a number of years. It was approved as of June of this year. This particular amendment is a way of trying to fast track and implement the changes as quickly as possible. That's why we're here before you today and going to council next week to try to implement those rate changes as quickly as possible, to start collecting development charges to fund the required infrastructure out to 2046. The rates that were approved, provisional DC rates that were approved in May, did not come into effect until August 17th. We had a 3-month transition period. And in this case, currently, we're not proposing a transition period. So those new rates would come into effect, if approved by council, would be come into effect as of October 31st of this year. The draft rates were circulated at the end of August. August 30th, the draft DC background study was posted online as a rule or a criteria as part of the development charge process. The background study has to be published 60 days prior to council approval. You'll see that the DC rates that came into effect fully as of August 17th were indexed as of October 1st, based on the 2023 non-residential infrastructure construction price index, which is the statutory indexation rate. October 9th, the proposed bylaw was posted online, and it includes the various changes being proposed to the definitions and to the various sections in the bylaw. I'm here before you today, or we're here before you, the staff, presenting these changes as of today. This is the statutory public meeting to allow individuals and stakeholders to make presentation concerning the proposed changes, and of course, going to council as of October 30th for approval. Next slide, please. So these are some of the staff recommendations. The technical amendment that Councillor Gower was nice enough to go through in great detail. Then the bylaw amendment, the various changes that are being proposed and sections of the bylaw that are changing as step 2. And then step 3, of course, is that this is the one statutory public meeting that is required. We're not going to have another public meeting. And again, that's part and parcel of the legislative requirements that would be recognized at this meeting. Next slide, please. And thank you. And I'd like to thank, as my manager mentioned, that there's been a whole lot of staff involved in this process. I've been away on vacation for 3 weeks in London and Spain and Italy. So they've been working diligently on making changes and updating the information so that it would be available today. So I'd like to thank them personally for that hard work. Thank you.
I'll echo those thanks and just say welcome back. There are delegations, but I am going to ask Councillor Menard to put forward a motion that he wants on the table. That's being put on the table by Vice Chair Gower, just in his role as neutral vice.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the Vice Chair Gower on the procedure, and to staff for their assistance and feedback on this. Whereas the City of Ottawa does not charge for several DC eligible service categories that the municipality is permitted to charge for under the Development Charges Act 1997, and whereas these service categories include important services in our city such as public health, childcare, long-term care, waste diversion services, emergency preparedness, and municipally administered court services. And whereas from our new municipal administrative penalty system to new childcare legislation to a global pandemic to a crisis in long-term care to unprecedented weather events, these categories represent services that have been recently and significantly impacted by changing environmental factors and legislative context. And whereas this changing context warrants considerations of levels of service and how we fund these services, whereas the city is currently undergoing master plan renewal and a comprehensive development charge bylaw update, whereas the city and this council have expressed that our municipality is facing significant financial shortfalls and has requested that higher orders of government provide financial relief, and whereas reviewing what revenue streams we are not currently collecting but could be under existing provincial legislation is warranted in this context, and whereas capital costs that are not funded through development charges are instead funded by taxpayers. Therefore, be it resolved that staff, as part of the comprehensive DC bylaw update scheduled for next year, review the feasibility of implementing additional DC eligible service categories that are currently not charged for, including services related to public health and childcare and early years programs and services under Part 6 of the Childcare and Early Years Act 2014, and any related services. Services related to proceedings under the Provincial Offences Act, including bylaw enforcement services and municipally administrative court services. Services related to emergency preparedness, services related to long-term care, and waste diversion services. Be it further resolved that this review also include a consideration of the potential for reduced financial pressure on taxpayers of implementing additional DC eligible service categories, and a consideration of the potential advantages of establishing a level of service analysis where none currently exists, and a recommendation on whether or not council should implement additional DC service categories. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And obviously members will have the opportunity to explore that with staff through the course of questioning, but we'll go straight to public delegations now. The first of whom is Mr. Burgraff with the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. Jason, welcome back. No stranger to the committee. You've got 5 minutes to make a presentation.
I was going to say, I missed you guys. You need to hold planning like every week so that we can do this as opposed to just every 2, but thanks very much. I wanted to give a high level overview of kind of our written summary, or our written submission rather, that was sent in. A lot of points do speak to the updated background study and amending and methodologies that I think are partially addressed by the technical amendment and connecting those dots and releasing information that we had hoped to have beforehand. Obviously, getting it right now is not satisfactory, but you know, we have it. We'll do our best to look through it in the next week before council and provide any additional thoughts on those. So I am going to skip kind of points about that in our written submission. But I will jump to the second page for those following along on two questions that came up in our discussions with staff over the past month or so. One is local service policies, or sorry, the first is local service policies. And that is basically the flexibility to have DC eligible infrastructure be in, that's not in the project list in the background study, but nonetheless still be eligible for DCs. It's a critical piece for, you know, projects that we don't necessarily anticipate and staff didn't necessarily anticipate moving forward, but then become timely or become priority. Staff, you know, in their response to our question on this, which is also appended to our written submission, acknowledge this need for flexibility, but aren't, you know, willing to kind of change any of the language within the background study in order to accommodate that. So that's always kind of a concern for interpretation moving forward. The second piece is cash in lieu is being used to fund part of the benefit to existing on a number of projects. We can get into some of those details, but essentially, you know, the city is taking some of its parkland cash in lieu that it's collecting and offsetting the obligation that would typically go to benefit to existing or the existing tax base. So therefore, growth is actually paying for a larger proportion than what it looks like on paper. And maybe perhaps even more critically, you're actually robbing yourselves of cash and funds that you would use to improve parks and parkland issues there. That's kind of come up again in this exchange of questions. That's been over the past few months or past few weeks rather, and something that we're going to dig into more as we proceed forward. There's another piece we talk about of just the transparency on reporting in terms of how much information you know, we have to request typically at each time of this bylaw exchange of historic and year-end balances of what we spent on, what's been transferred out of allocations for certain projects into other projects, which you are, you know, legally allowed to do with the DCs, but nonetheless, it then inhibits the construction of the projects that were actually on your list to begin with. And it all kind of speaks back to what we have been trying to work out with the city on our appeal for the 2019 bylaw, which is essentially, please give us this reporting of this kind of info on an annual basis as we move forward. That minutes of settlement still hasn't been signed yet, although we sort of have an agreement that we thought was agreed to, but actually hasn't been finalized as of yet. I'm going to jump really quickly, I think, into two more pieces, or actually, maybe I'm going to speak to the last piece since I only have a minute left. And I think it's fundamental that, again, everyone should recognize how quickly the DC is increasing. You know, you saw even just the summary that was shown up, a 7% increase, but that's a 7% increase in a month. That's the October 1st rate versus the October 30th rate. In our submission, we detail that, in fact, if you look at October 1st, 2023 versus October 30th, 2024, which is proposed, DCs are going up 27% inside the Greenbelt, 24% outside the Greenbelt, and then I think another 24% in rural serviced and 27% in the unserviced serviced part of rural areas as well. So it's, you know, and we have another two increases. Again, you know, Gary mentioned about the next indexation proposed for April 1st, and then we'll have yet another increase related to the transportation master plan. All of this speaks to, again, you know, a critical need for a transition policy to give home buyers or give home builders the opportunity to price in these increases so that they're not a shock at the end of the system, and you're not selling a house that 2 months down the road has a significant fee increase on the DC side of things. I've hit my time, so I'll leave it there, but happy to answer any questions. I've also asked Ursula Malens and Derek Kelleher, which I think most people should be familiar with, to join us online to get into any of the more technical questions if need be.
Thank you very much, Jason. So Ursula, I presume is just back up to you today. It's not a separate presentation?
No, it's not. No, neither is Daryl. They're just yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. So there are questions from members. Councillor Devine.
I didn't think I was first in the queue, but thank you. Great. Thank you, colleagues, for allowing me the privilege to speak to you as a non-committee member. I've been excited by conversations I've had with staff over the past several weeks, largely with Gary Baker before he went to Spain, on the issue of the applicability of development charges specifically for transit projects. And I know that the DC amendments and the recommendations that we're looking at in this report here now speak to the timing of our infrastructure master plan. But next year we have the transportation master plan.
Sorry, do you have questions of the delegation?
Jason, I'm so sorry. No,
no
Thank you.
issue.
no. Oh, my hand was up for, sorry, I beg your
I
pardon.
was excited. I appreciate it.
I thought, nope, sorry, beg your pardon.
Yeah, if you have questions of the delegation, feel free to put your hand back up. But Councillor Curry has questions for you.
I do. You won't like this question at all. So if,
Sweet. Have at it.
just to get you ready for it.
Sure.
So if the developers have not been able to price in these increases, the impact is what? The developers make less profit.
You actually, most now have agreements because issues like this have come up so long that many have the option or have a clause within the contracts to actually pass on that fee increase to the home buyer at the closing if it deemed necessary. Ones who don't will certainly have to absorb that in the cost. You have to think that in the aggregate of then a subdivision of 100 homes or possibly more, or a condo of 100 or more 100 units. That's a significant impact that any corporation would be very difficult to absorb.
See, but the thing is, we've had these conversations before that they absorbing them. And so then if this happens at development, like a developer would go bankrupt over these, like I don't know why the assumption is that it has to be passed on to home builders, only because then it means less profit for the developer. It doesn't have to be passed on.
Councillor, we have seen projects in this city go bankrupt because of increasing costs over the past couple of years. And it is a reality that is something that can happen with increasing costs, and especially with DCs.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brockenden.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you again for your delegation. One thing that struck with me was your comment about a transition policy, which I think is a fair comment to put on the table. How do you envision that would work? Do you have any thoughts on that? How would that be implemented?
So essentially, it's just about a timeline of notification. Even my friend here next to me even mentioned about if we're going to do an April 1st indexation, that rate would actually come out in November, right? So it's just sort of about the timeline. That's what we would need is again a 3-4 month timeline, which has been typically the case. Usually, the real concern is that rate has been coming out, at the end of February, and then would be the original proposal was to have it come in on April 1st. So you're only talking a matter of a couple of weeks in order to accommodate that price increase. So it's just all it is just 3-4 months ahead of time.
Which I think is a fair request. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jason. Nice to see you.
See you.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I ask other developers who push back on the development charges issue, which is if growth is not paying for growth, and if you don't believe we should raise development charges, how do you think we should pay for the infrastructure that we need to fund?
So
what is your preference? What is a tool that you think would be better? Because I've heard that this places the burden potentially on new homeowners if the developer chooses to pass that on to them.
what else would you like to see? Because we need to pay for the infrastructure that supports all this housing. There's no two ways about it.
I'm not saying, so growth should pay for growth. And in fact, growth, as we've seen with actually the city robbing Peter to pay Paul within its own hands, the funds you're getting from growth are actually paying for more than the proportion. The issue is not that growth pays for growth. It's something that I brought up in May, and I'll bring it up again now, and I detail it in the submission. It's so many other items within the background study that are being the majority of being paid for by growth that aren't necessarily growth related. The biggest one, or one of the ones that are most illustrative, is this new Olympic level swimming pool that at least at the time didn't have a place where it was supposed to go. Presumably it's going to Brewer Park. It's, a facility, the city needs it, sure. You can make that argument, that's fine. I don't appreciate why new home buyers, for the next 10 years are paying the majority of the cost of an Olympic level swimming pool that's designed for swim meets and what have you. I don't see how that translates into something that again, the majority of cost should go to growth.
Okay, well, councils are elected to decide on priorities for our community. That's one item. But would you advocate a significant raise in property taxes to spread the load for items like that? Because it has to come from somewhere. So, because every developer who's come to me to complain about development charges, I said, great, then come to committee at budget season and say you want to see large property tax increase, because it's really one or the other. And the argument is that, okay, if you think property taxes are more fair because we all share the load, great. But no one's coming to say that. So, and we can't have neither.
Councilor, development charges are meant for the growth portion of increased infrastructure and roads and what have you for that. The city has very limited options to collect the rest, but that's for you guys to decide. You're the ones in the chair, not us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions for you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
We do have a public delegation as well, and I'm sorry if I get this name wrong. PM Vasudev. Welcome to committee, sir. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation. And we'll just ask you to press the button that's on the mic stand.
Yes.
Excellent. Merci.
Thanks for the opportunity and good afternoon to all of you. My limited submission that I've made by email to Mr. Gary Baker is for a request to create a new category for the levy of development charges, because as the presentation made by Mr. Gary Baker pointed out, the scheme recognizes 4 categories. Within the urban boundary, it is inside Greenbelt and outside Greenbelt. And then it is rural serviced and rural unserviced. So my request is for recognition of a new category called urban unserviced, because there are such properties. We have, I can speak in a very definite context because our family owns a little property on Mayor Blue Road in Orleans, which is about 1.78 acres. Councillor Kitts is quite familiar with the background of this. And it has public water, but not public sanitary service. And so we submitted, it's about 1.78 acres, and we submitted a concept plan. I'm just setting out the context, so my request makes better sense to the committee. We submitted a concept plan for building 18 semi-detached homes on the property with an internal road and a captive wastewater system based on what's called the membrane bioreactor technology, which is very contemporary, and it is quite appropriate for that property because it backs into a creek. So the treated sewage can flow into the creek. But that was not supported by city staff. So that's the bigger context for my request here. As the development chart scheme shows, there is no recognition of this category of urban unserviced because it has its own dynamics. One is about the need for, I mean, there's another property down the road owned by another family, which is about 3 acres, which is also ripe for development. And these properties are currently zoned development reserve for medium to light to medium density housing. But nothing can be done about it because it doesn't have sanitary service. And the city is not willing to support captive systems by small developers who may not be professional developers like myself. I'm not one, and I'm not aspiring to be one either. But we do have this property that can be beneficially used, but it is not. We are not able to do it because of these policy constraints. So a first step in opening up such properties for future development, according to the zoning bylaws, because as I mentioned, these properties are already zoned development reserve. So that's what they are earmarked for. And I have also produced along with my representation Schedule 9 to the infrastructure master plan, which shows that there is no plan. I've been in consultation with city officials. There is no plan to provide any sanitary service for these properties, at least not until 2046, which is the period covered by the current infrastructure master plan. So this creates a situation where we have these valuable lots of urban property, which cannot be developed. So in the context of development charges, I think creation of this category is very important. That's my submission to the committee because it has its own dynamics, and the development charges applicable. That's another request I have included in my representation, that these development charges need to be separately determined for this class because of its unique situation. So that's basically my submission, and I don't think I took 5 minutes, but I'll stop here because I think I'm happy to answer any questions on this.
Thank you very much for being here today. I don't have a question, but I just did want to make a comment that my team did meet with the delegation. We have chatted with staff about this, and I understand that it's not feasible from a staff perspective. So I don't know if colleagues want to ask staff questions when we get there, but I just did want to note that we have had some conversation around it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitts. I am curious. We're not dealing with a lot of doors here, the number of doors who would be this urban unserviced is potentially fairly low. Is there not another mechanism to be exempted from or to challenge development charges? There is another mechanism. We'll come back to it for staff. Have you explored alternatives to getting a different development charge regime?
Well, if development becomes possible, my first obstacle will be to get the city staff to support applications like ours.
Yep.
Where we are dependent on contemporary or modern state-of-the-art captive wastewater systems. And once we get through with that, the matter of detail will start, which will be about the development charges, the levy of development charges, and also the measure of development charges. Because ours is not fully serviced. So there will be a cost towards creation of sanitary infrastructure within such projects. As I mentioned, just down the road, there is another property owned by a family that I know quite well. Theirs is much bigger. It's a 3-acre property as well. But these are all shut out from the possibility of further construction. There's one dwelling house on that property as we have on ours. But we can't do anything with it because of this problem. So this is a problem we'll have to grapple with down the line once we are able to get past this in principle approval of the concept plan, and then we get down to the details.
Yep.
So now this is, as Mr. Gary Baker mentioned, this is the last public meeting, and no further public meeting is considered necessary. I thought it is appropriate to place before the committee this issue and leave it to the committee to deliberate on it and make an appropriate decision on the creation of a new category.
It's interesting. And of course, any member has the opportunity today to put forward a motion to do that. But it sounds like that is a tomorrow problem after you've gotten through the first stage of technical acceptance of the system that you're proposing. So I'm not sure that we'll see that today, but I do want to ask Gary about some of the alternative mechanisms should you succeed at getting staff approval for that alternative system. I don't see any further questions for you. Thank you very much for the presentation today.
Thank you.
Which does lead us into questions of staff. Sean, sorry. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Just to recap from where we left off, I'm excited. Gary went to Spain. And thanks for having me here today. Thanks for allowing me here today. So I've been speaking with staff over the last little while about the applicability of development charges to transit-related projects. I know that the recommendations and the report here today are more aligned with the timing of the IMP, but next year we have the TMP updates coming, and so that's why I'm speaking to this item today. So I have a few questions to staff that seek to expand on one of the staff recommendations in this item, which is the recommendation to move the annual indexing rates from October 1st to April 1st. Gary, a few questions for you. Do we align the timing of our rate indexing according to the quarterly updates from Statistics Canada's Building Construction Price Index?
Yes, we do. What we do is that currently we look at the annual adjustments. So it would be like January 1st to December 31st. And then that's published by Statistics Canada as of February-ish. And then we implement it as of October 1st. So that we're currently using that statutory DC index for Ottawa-Gatineau to adjust our rates right now.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's fair to say, and I think that our official plan and the Transportation Master Plan support this, that there's an imperative to help prioritize the use of DCs for the advancement of transit-related projects. That's my opinion. Would staff agree with that assessment?
Yes, in particular, like I guess back in 2016 under Bill 73, the changes that were made by the province to allow for all municipalities in Ontario to collect a greater component of development charges to fund growth-related infrastructure for transit. We as the City of Ottawa lobbied along with the region of Waterloo to have those changes put in place. So yes, it's been one of our priorities for a number of years.
Thank you. Is it feasible to say then that we could generate more DC revenue for transit-related projects if transit-related DCs were indexed twice per year instead of once per year?
I believe so. I mean, I haven't looked at it in particular, but some municipalities currently index their rates on a semi-annual basis. So, and that the reason why they would do that is because it compounds the amount of development charges that they can collect. So I think we could go back and look at, examine like what a 1 year adjustment would be versus a 2 year, a semi-annual adjustment and see what that difference is over, say, a 5 year time frame.
Thank you. And if you were to do that, would it involve a lot of additional work from staff to do a second indexing to the DC rate for transit-related projects?
Well, with the what happened on October 1st, the new LMS system is in place. So I know from my perspective, prior to the LMS system being available, adjusting development charge rates was a much more laborious process because you had, if 1 cent was changed in any of the rates, all of the allocations, which were like over 300 of them, would have to be changed. We don't have that criteria anymore in the LMS system, so it'd be much more straightforward to make changes because it would just be that specific component that would be changing as opposed to all the other allocations as well.
So based on that, and based on the fact that it would not be that much work to do, so I'm going to ask if this is something that staff would be willing to study and report back on. And I appreciate that the chair and members of the committee are willing to allow a direction from a non-committee member. So would staff accept the following direction? That staff be directed to analyze the feasibility of applying indexing twice a year for transit-related projects on April 1 and October 1, and that staff report back with their findings and recommendations prior to the DC bylaw update when incorporating the Transportation Master Plan.
Yes, I think so. I believe so, yes.
Great.
It sounds reasonable.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kicks.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand that the industry has appealed the May bylaw. Fair to say we anticipate that they will appeal this bylaw as well?
Maybe. I think though, with Jason's comments about his particular response to Councillor Troster's question was more on the recreation side of things, and this is more water, wastewater related. There may be specific items, but I always thought that, or I always think that water and wastewater is fundamental for their servicing criteria. So there may be some items that could be looked at more closely or whatever, but I don't necessarily anticipate too many adjustments, but I probably
Okay.
We're
Cautiously
probably going to have 50 of them. So sorry, but no, I think it's like I said, and then we're trying to accommodate the change this time from the indexation from October 1st to April 1st, trying to provide greater notice. We're not going to index the water and wastewater rates as of April 1st, 2025. We're going to apply indexation rate, which is not an annual rate, but a 3/4 of for 2024 as of 2025. So we've made various adjustments and trying to accommodate and say that here's greater notice, fairness, and so on and so forth. So hopefully those changes will be satisfactory.
Okay, cautiously optimistic. That's good. Now that we're reintroducing development-related studies as a DC eligible cost, and also noting the recent changes to the PPS and those implications, is it fair to say that master plans are going to need to be updated more frequently on a go-forward basis? And I say that because both the IMP and TMP haven't been updated in over a decade. I appreciate that COVID had a role to play in that, but speaking for only Ward 19, the population has increased by over 15,000 in that time period. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a need to do more frequent master plan updates.
Well, I think from my perspective, I think it's acknowledged that the province made a mistake in Bill 23 by removing studies as an eligible service. Because if you don't have those studies, you can't also identify where servicing is required, next step, water, wastewater, and then so on and so forth. So I think it's obvious that the province has come to the conclusion that it's better to have studies in place and to allow that kind of flexibility. The other speaking to your issue is that they want to fast track housing, and you need those studies to identify what types of services you need. I'm not sure it'll be at the master servicing level, but certainly there would be more studies required and analysis needed to determine what exactly is growth related and which type of projects would be needed to be funded from development charges in the future. So I think yes, I think there would be. And I think the amounts that are included in the proposed changes has increased, and I think staff have examined the criteria that they need and the types of studies that they would need to do. And those are reflected in those adjusted costs that are currently being proposed to be reintroduced with the reintroduction of studies.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just a follow up to staff. I mean, do you anticipate we're going to need to do master plan updates on a more frequent basis than we have in the last little bit?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we would have to keep up, and it depends on if we have urban expansions.
Yeah.
So
okay,
keep up.
Okay, great. You want us to comment on motions, directions now too?
Yes.
Okay. So speaking of the motion, why do we not currently collect DCs for some of the things outlined in the motion, public health, childcare, long-term care, emergency preparedness? Why don't we do that already?
I think in some cases we haven't had the need, or there wasn't a growth weighted component that would justify having a charge in place. So I'm just thinking of like long-term care. The city hasn't been constructing those facilities, right? So therefore there wouldn't be a need to impose a development charge to help offset the costs of those capital projects. With Councillor Menard's motion, over the years, I've had ad hoc discussions with staff about the need to, say, potentially introduce a charge, right? Say, for emergency preparedness, I did contact them a couple of years ago to say that the province actually kept that in as a eligible service. But the initiative will have to be that they have to determine what their level of service is and then go forward if there's a need for growth-related infrastructure. But so I think via Councillor Menard's motion, it'll be less of an ad hoc and more a specific discussion with the various departments to say, do you have a need for growth-related infrastructure? And it has to be clearly defined, because the other item I find over the years is that just because we're expanding something doesn't mean it's growth-related. It's kind of like that, new stuff, not necessarily growth-related. But those types of discussions can transpire. The other thing, like childcare, we were collecting for DCs for childcare in 2004 and 2009, but in 2014 we stopped because the provincial changes that then Liberal government introduced for junior kindergarten and seemed to reduce the demand for childcare spaces that were being funded from that development charge pot. You'll see in the Treasurer's report that's upcoming in November that we're still actually funding projects from that, even though we haven't been collecting for it since 2009 ish. So anyway, but each one of them we'll look at and examine and see if there's a need for it. And of course, waste diversion was part of those changes under Bill 73, and staff will and are intent on looking into using DCs to pay for a component of those services. And we didn't reintroduce it in 2019 because we didn't have the opportunity to establish a level of service. So hopefully in the future, we'll be able to identify exactly what our level of service is. The unique thing about waste diversion is that it would only apply to residential because we don't collect on the non-residential side. So there's various reasons and analysis that is required, and sometimes it just was maybe too burdensome, maybe too complicated, and so on and so forth. So.
Okay, and given the complexity, too early to have an estimate on, costs that would be added to a home if that were to go through, correct? That'll come forward if the work gets done.
Exactly, yeah. That once the determination that there is a growth-related component required, then a level of service can be ascertained, and then we can see what the split would be, say, for res, non-res allocations. But with soft services, they tend not to be as the major driver of development charges are public transit, roads and related services, water, wastewater. The other soft services are not as large a component of the development charges that are applied. In our case, it might be like 70-75% are those four services, with the rest with the remaining services. So I don't anticipate there would be a large increase in development charges, but of course it'd have to be deemed to be growth related and looked at carefully to make sure that it is growth related.
Okay, thank you. And then just on the direction, I appreciate that it's asking to explore feasibility. Would it be a heavy lift to do the same for road-related projects? And I ask this because I think the intent of the direction references getting this information to help inform the TMP. I do note that many projects in the TMP are road-related and are complete street projects, which have an active transportation component, or in some cases make transit stops that are currently inaccessible, accessible. So I think if we are taking a look at this, it's important to include both.
Yeah, and I think Councillor Devine's direction, it does tie in with the transportation master plan. And of course, roads and related services are a major component of that. So I think that they can probably be looked at the same time. What the impact potentially would be on transit DC rates and what they would be on road and related services. I assume it would be applied across all of the, not just like arterial roads, or would be.
Yeah, encompassing road related.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no.
Okay,
and
so
yeah, that's reasonable.
Can staff accept that direction to include roads in that review too?
I believe so, yes. Yeah.
Great, Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Dudas.
Thank you. Just because we were talking about Councillor Menard's motion, I just wanted to ask staff, you gave a very fulsome response. But I just wanted to know, are there any, from staff's perspective, are there any concerns with that motion or any of the elements where contained within?
No, I don't think there's any concerns because we have, and like I said, it's been ad hoc the last number of years, whether something being looked at or staff having the opportunity to potentially include something in the development charges background study. But once that determination is made, then if there's no growth related component, then there's not all municipalities collect the full spectrum of the 19 services that are eligible to, we have our 10 or 11. Each municipality seems to have potentially a slightly different bundle, but most of us have like public transit. Well, not if you have transit, but roads, water, sewer are the main stormwater. But once we look at it, some of it maybe just say there's no POA, there's no requirement to have additional space, there's no growth related component. So therefore, we don't need a DC to fund it. Similar to long-term care, where we're not necessarily in the business of constructing long-term care facilities. So we don't have a need to impose a development charge to pay for that particular project or projects.
Okay. Okay. No, I just wanted to fully understand if we're going to change policy and legislation. I just want to understand the implications. When we first, I think it was back in May, when council first approved the changes to the DCs. And at that time, the housing minister, the federal housing minister, indicated that by making these changes, we were potentially looking at withdrawal of federal funding and supports. I don't want to remind anybody that that was discussed at the federal level, but have we seen any indication that they are going to follow through on that completely unnecessary and unfounded threat?
I receive different types of threats, so that's not one of them. So I'm not aware of. I know that it was something that was being discussed in the fall, in the spring of fall of last year, the spring of this year, but I haven't heard any further updates or any type of additional information coming from the federal government, any more announcements or whatever. So that I'm not aware of anything at this time. So they may or may not be happy with Ottawa, but I think I think part of the reason why there was a little bit of confusion or whatever, because they didn't really specify what exact criteria were they looking at, and what type of services were they thinking of funding? Because I don't know, as we just talked about, there's a broad spectrum of services that can be deemed to be growth related. But was that funding going to be applied to that full spectrum, or was it just going to be specific to certain components like public transit or for parks or something like this here? So, but personally, I'm not aware of any updates, and I haven't seen anything. And I'm kind of my hobby is development charges. I said that to the current city manager, and I haven't seen anything across the country as to the federal government making any more changes, other than I think, as I pointed out, I think it was more to do with British Columbia, and they're changing their development cost charges that kind of triggered their concerns with DCs increasing or DCCs increasing in BC, and not necessarily within the Ontario context.
Okay, thank you. So in this case, no news is good news, and we look forward to continuing to work with our federal partners in terms of receiving their funding. No, that's it for me. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm just wondering if you could explain why development charges are going up 7% inside the Greenbelt and only 2% outside the Greenbelt.
Through the chair, the reason that they're going up 7% inside the Greenbelt is that there are a number of projects that were identified in the infrastructure master plan that are there to support the intensification that's projected in the new official plan. So there are several sanitary system upgrades, so sanitary sewage diversion projects with some significant price tags tied to them, and that explains the increase.
The only reason I ask is there's so much development going on in Councillor Kitt's wards in Ward 19, and Councillor Kitts comes to council and to committee all the time to talk about not having things like sidewalks and basic road infrastructure, not having any transit, not having any libraries. So I'm just wondering how that computes, because I understand we need to do these upgrades downtown, but there's so many other amenities in a growing community that her community is missing. I'm just wondering if that's taken into account with the DC rates for outside the Greenbelt.
Through the chair, the percentage increase is related to the, that's the impact of the water and wastewater projects in the infrastructure master plan, and wouldn't reflect any, needs associated with other services. The increase is relatively modest outside the Greenbelt because we have, rollover of projects. Once projects are done, are fully funded, they come off the list. We have new projects coming on the list, and we have projects that haven't been implemented yet from the 2013 infrastructure master plan. So as a result, the increase is limited.
Thank you very much. Chris, can I just ask you to unpack that inside the Greenbelt stormwater issue at a higher level, maybe? I think we have some very aggressive intensification targets for inside the Greenbelt. And I'm not sure that the stormwater system is capable of handling that. We are looking at some big expenses coming down the road.
Yes, Chair, the projects that I was referring to are for sanitary sewage, not stormwater. There are no stormwater projects in the infrastructure master plan, and that's because development is responsible for delivering all of those services, the trunk services, and those are mainly outside the Greenbelt. But in terms of intensification, major intensification projects are required to do on-site stormwater management so that they retain their stormwater on-site and release it from the property at the same rate that it is released under pre-development conditions.
Sorry, I misspoke, but with respect to the sanitary, the capacity to handle
Oh, I see.
the capacity for intensification that we have given existing sanitary constraints.
Yeah, well, those projects are intended, the projects identified in the IMP are intended to sort of unlock the capacity needed to support the intensification. There are also potential local system constraints. And if you recall through the infrastructure master plan, we had recommended implementation of a new intensification capacity management program that would look at the capacity of local systems and identify projects through secondary planning processes and other mechanisms to identify those local needs, as well as how we're going to fund and finance them. That's over and above the trunk level projects that the IMP has identified.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of projects inside the Greenbelt, we know that stormwater and sanitary upgrades are needed, and you're saying they cost more for inside the Greenbelt. That's what the rate is higher. Is that correct?
Historically, we've been able to leverage existing capacities and existing systems to be able to accommodate intensification, but with the higher rates projected in the new official plan, we need new projects to augment the capacity that's there.
Yeah, because there's going to be a lot more people inside. I mean, our official plan says 60% of the growth should be in existing urban areas. This also applies on other infrastructure for recreation. And I have concerns. I just want to make sure that we take that into consideration because particularly in a ward like mine with stage 2 LRT, where intensification is going to be around the stations, we need more facilities, and we're working on those. We've got projects that could be done. So wouldn't they be qualifying for development charges?
Mr. Chair, I see Kevin Wary is on the line. The Parks Development and Recreation Master Plan that council has already endorsed provides the facilities for those needs, but let's speak to Kevin.
Thank you for that. Yes, Chair, the Parks Recreation Facilities Master Plan was completed in 2021 in lockstep with the official plan. So we were fully aware of the intensification targets at that time. And we have identified several projects inside the Greenbelt to help accommodate growth. As with anybody working inside the Greenbelt, a lot of ours would involve perhaps expansion of existing facilities because land is typically an issue. However, those are accommodated. And then speaking specifically to development charges, these items were identified in the update that was done in May. So the May update to the development charges included several inside the Greenbelt projects.
Thank you. Just appreciate it because that is important. You've got to continue to upgrade in the core because it's ever changing. We're going to have a lot more people and they need more facilities. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. If you answered this when I was out of the room, let me know. But the idea of an unserviced rate inside the urban boundary, any comments on that came up earlier today?
Currently the only unserviced criteria that we have is in the rural area with so if you're in area 1 and 2, you pay the full inside Greenbelt or outside Greenbelt charge. The other, I guess, item, technically, I guess I'm supposed to keep it short, but technically the services that you're paying for with development charges, you don't necessarily have to receive those services, if you see what I'm saying, right? If you have a library in your basement, you still have to pay the library development charge. So if you don't necessarily utilize the central services for, say, water and wastewater, you're still required to pay that component inside and outside. Plus, in the future with redevelopment, if you're going to redevelop that site, you may need those central services to provide more intensification, right? So it's kind of a fail-safe to say that in the future, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but there might be an obligation for that particular site to be serviced in the future with water and wastewater. That's sort of the reason why we do that with inside and outside the Greenbelt.
Okay. Mr. Bergerath raised an issue about the city using cash in lieu of parkland funding towards our benefit to existing. Is that accurate? And are we allowed to do that?
Well, I can tell you from my personal experience when I was in finance, we have been doing it for a number of years, funding parks, the non-growth component of parks from the cash in lieu of parkland component. And I believe part of the adjustments that are being proposed with the Parks and Recreation submission is that to clarify that would also be used, that component would be used to fund the recreation, the non-growth component of recreation facilities as well. But we have been using cash in lieu for a number of years. And if you recall, in 2014, when we stopped collecting development charges to pay for parks outside Greenbelt in the rural area, there was we thought that we would save on the tax side, but we had been funding the non-growth component from the cash in lieu of parkland. So that's been a process that we've had in place for like 20 years now that we've been doing that. And I think we're just expanding that application of funds.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I don't see any other member questions. First, thank you very much for taking the direction from both Councillors Devine and Councillors Kitts with respect to taking a look at the indexing on the transportation side. I presume that you'll solicit the input of the home builders before providing us with any potential avenues to go down on that path. And then the second question I had for you was with respect to Councillor Menard. his motion. It seems very worthwhile to do, but I just want to make sure that staff believe that this is a good direction in which to go.
Like, as I said, it is, we've done it on an ad hoc basis. So this is just kind of formalizing that process.
Perfect, thank you. And those were my questions. I don't see anything else. Okay, so what do we got? We got a technical motion. Is that carried? Phew. There is the Menard motion. Is that carried? And there is the report. Is that carried? Done. All right. Thank you very much, staff. I know how intensive this work is. Much appreciated. We have no in-camera items. There was an IPD on the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority reserve appointment. I don't have any indication that there are notices of motion for subsequent meetings. Don't have any inquiries. We have no other business. We are adjourned until Wednesday, November 6th, 2024. Thank you very much, colleagues.